Welcome to Fanfiction Audiobooks. Pirates of the Navy Thunder God. Chapter 61 is Hell. 3 days later, a warship docked in the bay port right in front of the headquarters fortress. This is a real war beast. Not Garp's slutty bastard. The deck was lined with gun turrets and flags flying high. The soldiers held their muskets neatly on their shoulders, sparkling in the sun. This warship is the one that comes to pick up Ron, and others to go to Hell Island. Twice a year, 3 months each time, led by a vice admiral, it travels back and forth between Hell Island and the Navy headquarters. It has been in service for more than 20 years. The cleaned parts of the hull can vaguely see seaweed and green algae and sharp claw marks, full of mottled traces left by the years. The red rust on the muzzle and the white but clean military flag make a gust of iron and blood blow in your face. Ron was very familiar with the man who handed over the command of the warship to Flying Squirrel at the port. He was Vice Admiral Spider, one of the 5 vice admirals who participated in the demon-slaying order on Judicial Island in the original work, and the hawkish elite of the Navy who captured Marco while he was distracted during the War of Marineford. Although he didn't care about other people's sense of justice, Ron was relieved when he learned that the leader of his ship was the usually gentle Vice Admiral Flying Squirrel. It's all the same anyway, who likes to face a boss with a dead face all day long? Look at that group of soldiers, they are almost more afraid of the ghost spider than they are of the pirates. Thank you for your hard work, Vice Admiral Ghost Spider. The Flying Squirrel didn't care about Ghost Spider's expression at all. He walked up to him and saluted him seriously. It is our duty and obligation. Ghost Spider saluted in return and said, the warship was attacked by a sea king on its way back. Although the cabin has been repaired, we still have to be careful of leaks. In addition, there is still enough fresh water and supplies, so we can set sail at any time. Hawkish officers have one advantage, that is, they do whatever you say, without any extra thoughts. Unless they encounter force majeure or everyone is dead, they will try their best to complete the task beautifully, and they will not be greedy for credit. For example, when the Ghost Spider returned, a few simple words overshadowed the danger of being attacked by sea kings, but judging from the large pieces of brand new wooden boards on the side of the ship, the danger at that time must have been extraordinary. This is a war behemoth, a movable sea fortress. Even it had a large piece of its hull torn off, that Sea King was definitely not a good person. Seeing this, the Flying Squirrel saluted again, thanks for the reminder. I will pay attention. It is my responsibility. Ghost Spider returned the greeting, then biting his cigar, he glanced at the Navy rookies standing by with different expressions, paused for a moment at a face at the back of the crowd, and asked with a little surprise, that kid over there. I remember he only joined the Navy for half a year? Why is he here too? The Hwaju mission was a secret mission, so no one knew that Ron had been training in the Navy as a civilian except for the Corps members like Jean Guo. But even if they didn't know, Ron had only been in the Navy for more than half a year, and if he wanted to go to Hell Island, he would not be allowed to train for less than a year. Unless that brat is a little too strong. The marshal had to make an exception and let him go early. The Flying Squirrel knew who he was talking about. In fact, this was his first reaction when he got the list. But if you think about it, why not? The Navy strictly prohibits recruits who have been trained for less than a year from going to Hell Island. It is nothing more than a worry that the recruits are not strong enough and will not be able to get training. Instead, they may die there prematurely. In the end, it is still a question of strength. And this problem is not a problem at all for Ron. As long as he doesn't come into contact with certain monsters in the core area of Hell Island, his strength is more than enough to protect himself. Not to mention he is a naturalist. Even if most monsters are stronger than him, they have no means to restrain his elementalization. In addition, the self-healing ability that the top leaders are well aware of, the absolute speed and explosive power of the Thunder Fruit, the shockingly strong physique that has been tempered, all these conditions combined, if they want to kill Ron, even they have to be serious. Hearing this, Ghost Spider also remembered the 2,700 Dao power value that Ron had scored during the year-end evaluation. This was a number that completely exceeded the minimum standard for survival on Hell Island. So he nodded and sighed, "Are all the natural guys monsters? The current 3 generals are like this, and I am afraid that Ron will be like this in the future." "No, Ron is special." The flying squirrel shook his head and made no excuses. As a veteran in the Navy headquarters, second only to Garp and Sengoku, he witnessed how the 3 admirals became legends step by step. However, compared with Ron now, Flying Squirrel thinks he is still lacking. At least in terms of physical talent, he can leave the 3 admirals far behind. He learned paper painting in half a month. This interesting incident on Garp's ship has made everyone who knows about it regard Ron as a demon. After a lengthy inspection, the warship was allowed to set sail. Woohoo! With a shrill whistle, the war beast slowly moved away from the Navy headquarters. On the deck, there were a total of 36 recruits of the same period, including Ron. They were all elite recruits who met the minimum requirements. At first, everyone was excited at the thought that as long as they survived on Hell Island for more than 3 months, they would become qualified naval officers. But when Ghost Spider returned with the previous group of teams, this excitement was gradually replaced by anxiety, fear, and uneasiness. The reason is that, out of the last batch of 21 recruits who went to Hell Island, only 17 came back alive. The mortality rate is close to 20%. And these 17 people were all injured, haggard and miserable, even worse than beggars. Moreover, 3 of them were disabled, and 5 were seriously injured. Even if they recovered, their future was bleak. "Sir." Looking at the flying squirrel standing at the front of the deck with its sword drawn and looking at the Marine headquarters, one of the recruits boldly asked, "What on earth is Hell Island?" Before this, everyone was ordered not to tell the recruits any information about Hell Island. So the Hell Island, which the recruits regarded as the last hurdle on the road to success, was nothing to be afraid of. No matter how hard or tiring it was, could it be better than the training in the recruit camp? But when they really saw the miserable conditions of their senior brothers and sisters who returned from Hell Island, this luck was gradually infected by fear. Some of the timid ones were even trembling and began to regret signing the consent form. Hearing the new recruits' questions, the flying squirrel came back to his senses from his gaze and glanced at them. "Did you know, out of the 17 people who came back last time, only 9 of them passed?" Instead of answering the question, he asked a seemingly unrelated question. In response, the recruits shook their heads. Due to the information blockade, even the wealthy naval families did not dare to leak the news to their own children without authorization. They only warned them again and again that Hell Island was very dangerous and asked them to be prepared. "This is the only help we can provide you." The flying squirrel's gaze was as cold as a knife as he swept across the group of restless recruits. "If you think you can't survive, you can seek shelter at the warship station. It doesn't mean that you can ask for support at the cost of failure when your life is in danger, but when you think you can't survive, you can return to the warship and receive the protection of the flying squirrel." The meaning behind this is not just as simple as the power gap you face when in danger. It also means that Hell Island is a purgatory on earth that is enough to make these proud children of heaven bow their heads and submit to him. The recruits present were not stupid, and when these words were spoken, everyone's expressions suddenly tensed up. Hell Island is so terrifying. Even Ron is no exception. But unlike the others who were frightened, Ron was thinking, if it was that dangerous, how many sandbags suitable for training could he find? As for danger and death? So what? Becoming stronger is his only goal. If he died there, it would mean that he was just a man like that. The flying squirrel's words seemed unrelated, but they actually answered the recruit's question in another way. Where exactly is Hell Island? It's hell. Chapter 62, On the Way. The Navy headquarters, Judicial Island, and Impel Down form a triangle area. When the ocean current flows into the Great Triangle, it will be trapped inside, becoming a huge deformed whirlpool that no ship can escape. Normally, the three gates of justice control the operation of the ocean current. Once opened, the surging sea water can allow warships to travel at the highest speed, and the round trip takes no more than an hour. At the same time, because the ocean currents on both sides of the gate are reverse vortices caused by whirlpools, the ship cannot move forward, so only by passing through the gates of justice can you catch the correct ocean current and reach your destination. As for these three destinations, it is better not to mention them. For pirates and criminals, once they enter the triangular vortex, their lives are basically over. This knowledge is written in the original book, but it is inevitably lacking in depth compared to the immersive and entertaining education. When the warship they were on arrived at the Gate of Justice and saw the white giant door more than 1,000 meters high with their own eyes, this knowledge was very impressive. Lieutenant General Flying Squirrel, are you in charge of this Hell Island trial? Thank you for your hard work. The speaker is Magellan, the director of Impel Down, the user of the para-human poison fruit, a highly poisonous man. Starting from the Marine headquarters, their first stop was Impel Down. He was huge, at least 5 meters tall, wearing a black director's uniform, with horns on his head, and a terrifying appearance, looking very much like Satan in mythology. Because he is a poisonous man, even his exhaled breath is poisonous, so his subordinates dare not get too close to him, and even visitors have to wear gas masks in advance. Therefore, the Flying Squirrel had no intention of getting off the ship. He stood far away on the deck, checking information with Deputy Director Hannibal. This is just a formality. After all, so far, no one has been brave enough to impersonate a Vice Admiral of the Navy headquarters and advance deep into the heart of the city. After all, as long as there is something wrong, once the Gate of Justice is closed, no one can leave here. Yes. Admiral Hwashaishan had a temporary mission to go out to sea, so I changed the order with him. The Flying Squirrel answered slowly, and then looked at the huge and majestic building in front of him across the long wooden bridge. How is it? Have the prisoners been well behaved recently? They dare not behave themselves while I am here. Magellan smiled, and a puff of purple smoke came out of his body. As soon as the smoke came out, the surrounding prison guards suddenly became nervous and kept away from Magellan. Seeing this, Hannibal screamed, "Director! Are you finally ready to expose your ambitions and take action against your subordinates?" Under the silent gaze of a group of people, Hannibal, not knowing whether he was excited or something, drew his weapon. "Well, hurry up and do it. This way I can become the director." Guards. So you wish we would be killed, right? Magellan's face darkened and he glared at him murderously. "Shut up, idiot." Hannibal ran behind the Flying Squirrel and shouted, "Look, Admiral Flying Squirrel! Director Magellan is going to kill someone to silence him." Flying Squirrel. Boom. After kicking him off the boat, the Flying Squirrel's twitching lips calmed down and he saluted Magellan. "I have a mission to complete and cannot stay for long. I'll leave first." "Haha, Lieutenant General Flying Squirrel, take care on your journey, goodbye." Magellan, with a forced smile, held the screaming and wailing Hannibal in one hand and gestured back to the Flying Squirrel. Their destination, Hell Island, was far away from here, so they came to Propel City to save time. If they wanted to go directly from the Navy headquarters to the Com Belt, it would take 3 to 5 days to complete the journey in a straight line. However, Propel City, which extended into the Com Belt through the triangular whirlpool, only needed half a day. When the warship passed through the Gate of Justice, it closed immediately. The endless seawater roared and made a thunderous sound, hitting the Gate of Justice. But facing the towering and motionless Gate of Justice, it could only change its course in vain, bringing a natural defensive ocean current to the Gate of Justice. "What do you think of Director Magellan?" Suddenly, the Flying Squirrel asked Ron, who was passing by. "How about what?" Ron was confused. "The devil horns on his head are just decorations. Actually, they are his weapons. Okay. So you still remember I'm afraid of ghosts? Ron looked confused. But inserting the weapon on the head is a decoration, like a hairpin, this operation. Ron touched his crew cut. Can't learn. Everyone, attention, assemble on the deck. With a smile, the flying squirrel turned around and gave orders. Soon, all the recruits and ordinary soldiers who were going to Hell Island for training came to the deck, waiting for the flying squirrel to give a lecture. We have now entered the comm belt. I believe everyone has some understanding of the comm belt. You must remember that this is a dangerous place that even our navy cannot interfere with. It is the nest where large sea kings gather. If you don't want to die, everyone, cheer up. Do you understand? Yes. Very good. Now dismiss, follow the schedule strictly, no one should slack off. Understand. After another unison response, Ron's expression turned serious. Indeed, this is the doldrums. I don't know since when, the ocean flow has almost stopped, there is not a breeze in the sky, and the white military flag representing justice hangs down and sticks to the mast, like a dying salted fish. Here, even if the bottom of the Navy ships were covered with thin slices of sea stone to blend in with the sea and deceive the perception of the sea kings, it would not be absolutely safe. Half a month later, Ron, who was cleaning the deck, was awakened by a scream. Land, I see land. Immediately, a large number of soldiers came to the deck and looked into the distance. It's true. There's land. That's great. I can finally sleep well without having to worry at night. Everyone was cheering, even the calm flying squirrel couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. It's finally here. During the past half-month, everyone has been on high alert, fearing that a single negligence would lead to irreversible consequences. Because there is no air current in the doldrums, the ocean is almost still, so there is no need to worry about climate change, snowstorms, or rainstorms. However, the sea kings living in this sea area bring them far more terror than the weather. Ron clearly remembered the monster that rose from the sea that night a week after going to sea. It was a giant sea king that looked like a plesiosaur. According to the sea king illustrations, it was named Neptune, a mammal and a vegetarian. It seemed that it had woken up in the middle of the night and wanted to float to the surface for air. The warship was right on its back at the time, and when it floated up, it was directly lifted into the sky. The clouds are not far away and within reach. What's even scarier is that judging by the long neck that completely blocks out the moonlight, this guy's head is probably several thousand meters high. Such a terrifying beast, with just its breathing, could stir up the wind and clouds and make everything lose its color. Some soldiers were so desperate that they wanted to shoot, but they were stopped by the flying squirrel. Then, Neptune took a breath and slowly sank, and the warship also touched the sea water in the process. The flying squirrel immediately went forward at full speed without saying a word. After running for hundreds of miles overnight, everyone looked back and saw Neptune's long neck breaking through the clouds and looking straight into the sky. The cool moonlight sprinkled down, making Neptune wrapped in white scales look like a beautiful auspicious beast in mythology, which could not be looked up at. It is conceivable that Neptune under the moonlight will become a deep impression on this ship that will never be erased for a lifetime. Fortunately it didn't notice us, otherwise. The flying squirrel kept repeating this sentence for a whole week. In front of the huge Neptune, let alone this warship, even the entire Marineford would probably be just a toy that can be manipulated at will. Finally there is land. Ron was truly relieved at this moment, and like everyone else, he lay on the railing of the boat and looked into the distance. However, as the distance got closer, the cheers of surprise from all around slowly died down, and were replaced by gasps and terrified murmurs. Looking at the true appearance of Hell Island in front of him, Ron slapped his forehead. Yes, finding land does not mean that they have come to heaven from hell, but that they have stepped from one hell into another. Chapter 63 The True Face of the Test. In a cave in the southeast of Hell Island. There were torches on the dim cave walls, traces of bonfires everywhere on the ground, and a few bags of flour and pots and pans in the corners. It was obvious that the navy had been repaired here. All recruits, assemble! Following the order, Ron and the others who had just got off the boat lined up in front of the flying squirrel without even having time to look around. You have arrived at Hell Island, so from now on, the test has begun. The flying squirrel looked extremely serious at this moment, and walked past the group of recruits. Always remember 3 things. First, survive. Second, survive. Third, survive for me. We will not provide you with any help, whether it is food, medicine, or relevant information about the island, nothing. You are just a group of refugees stranded on a desert island. I don't care whether you stick together or train alone. Anyone who can stand in front of me in 3 months will be an officer of the Navy headquarters. Understand? Yes. Nothing is more important than the last sentence. If ordinary people want to become a naval officer, even if they are just a second lieutenant, they need to accumulate a lot of military merits and slowly gain experience. And as long as they pass this test, they can start at the lowest level of major. He is still a major in this department, his status is incomparable. The shortcut to success is to ascend to the heavenly shoe road. It's hard and difficult, but worth it. Very good. Looking at the group of high-spirited recruits in front of him, the flying squirrel nodded with satisfaction. To be honest, after experiencing the baptism of various sea kings in the calm belt, these guys have been trained enough, and their courage and momentum are incomparable. But that was a difficult time they went through under their command and protection, and the new recruits still lacked a bit of sharpness and decisiveness. If you don't experience real fighting, you won't know what death is. If you don't know what death is, you will be afraid of death and will not move forward in fear of the enemy. The Navy is not an ivory tower. They are more realistic and will not take it for granted to protect geniuses. They will be heartbroken when they are injured, but in fact, they can't do anything. What they need are soldiers, real elite soldiers who dare to fight and kill. Only iron and blood can forge elite soldiers. This point is unanimously recognized by the entire Navy, whether it is the Hawks, Doves, idle personnel, or Caps. Next, go get your last meal and have your last good night's sleep. Anyone who has not left by 7 a.m. tomorrow will be deemed to have forfeited. Now, disband. That night, when Ron was preparing to have a good rest in preparation for the test that would begin the next day, a new recruit found him. Ron, are you free now? The person who came was Quinn Dante, the 5th-ranked warrior in the year-end test. Although the 2nd-ranked warrior couldn't even hold his head up in front of Ron's 700 physical strength and 2,700 highest attack strength, Dante's strength was indeed one of the best in the new recruit camp, so it was not surprising that he participated in this test. Looking at the person who came, Ron felt a little surprised. He knew very well how fast he was growing. He was not much slower than the cheating protagonists of the Straw Hat Pirates in the original novel. The 700 Deo powers were already left behind by him. Now he only knew that if Tryon didn't kill him, the odds would be 55 between them. There is no way. The increase in armament haki and observation haki to a swordsman is too terrifying, it is simply a qualitative change. That gave them not only an indestructible spear, but also an indestructible shield. Finally, they were equipped with a radar system, which was equivalent to 17 or 18 eyes to guard against sneak attacks. Therefore, he thought that after a few months, his peers would have distanced themselves from him and they would never have any contact in this life. Unexpectedly, the sharp sword energy from Dong now made him feel a little dangerous. But just a hint of danger. It's like when a normal person sees a kitchen knife, they would feel it is dangerous but won't care. In a fight, Dong is indeed no match for him, but his sword can hurt him. Ron was very familiar with this feeling. I see. Is this the prototype of armament haki? Ron thought silently and smiled. It's been a few months since we last met. You've become much stronger, Dante. There's still a huge gap between me and you. Dong Te shook his head silently. He knew how powerful he was after accidentally awakening the prototype of armament haki. The reason why he did not participate in the first batch of tests led by Vice Admiral Ghost Spider was to master this power. Since the year-end test, Dong Te has been wary of Ron, who rarely appears in front of everyone. Originally, he thought that after becoming stronger, he could see the gap clearly, but when he really stood in front of Ron, he felt the terrifying aura of the other party, which was like an abyss in a prison. Just a natural gesture, but the extremely condensed violent aura made him shudder. It was like a ball of earth-shattering thunder that was suppressing its desire to revolt. Therefore, even if he truly masters the armament haki in the future and can restrain the natural elementalization, he is still no match for Ron. Dante knew this very well. After a moment of silence, he said, "You should have guessed my purpose, Ron. How about joining forces?" "Why should we join forces?" Ron said with a smile, then looked at the Navy soldiers who were busy setting up the cave with a pointed look, and asked, "What do you think is the significance of this test?" Significance? As one of the richest families in the Navy, and his father was a colonel in the headquarters, Dong Te naturally knew that the Navy was not having a bad taste in letting these rookies fight to the death on the deserted island. Instead, it was to hone them and let them truly grow up. But the meaning of it? Doesn't it help us to sharpen our will and become stronger? This explanation is both right and wrong. Ron shook his head. As long as you survive on the island for 3 months without dying, you will definitely be tempered and have your will tempered. So this is not the ultimate goal. Dong's expression became serious, and his tone inevitably showed a hint of respect. Please let me know. He wants us to see ourselves clearly. Ron looked into the cave with deep eyes, as if he was drilling through the rocks and soil, out of the ground, and into the sky. See yourself clearly. Dong frowned and chewed on this sentence carefully. Is it to make us see our own strength clearly and not be arrogant? Not only that. Ron explained slowly. Have you ever thought about Dong? People are different from each other. Some people are born to be unstoppable and good at fighting. Some people are only good at one aspect, but weak in other aspects. Now everyone seems to be a new soldier, and there is not much difference in all aspects. But when they really go out to sea to perform tasks and need to make their own judgments, different people will naturally slowly explore a set of policies that belong to them in life. The ultimate purpose of this test is just that. Using the harsh environment of Hell Island to force us to take survival as the first priority, make judgments, take actions, and find the most suitable way to survive in the crisis. Lieutenant General Flying Squirrel is not saying that we don't care what method we use to get through this difficult time, but that we must make the decision ourselves regarding our future. Dong was quite perceptive. As he listened to Ron's explanation, his eyes became brighter and brighter. After Ron finished speaking, he couldn't wait to add. So, whether we gather together or go it alone, tempering our will, becoming stronger, and enriching our knowledge are all trivial matters. Hell Island is just a shrunken ocean, full of dangers. The real purpose of the test is to let us recognize ourselves in advance. As long as we recognize ourselves now, there will be no hesitation in the future. So that's it. So that's it. Dong clenched his fists and his whole body was shaking with excitement. Originally, he thought this was just a test of strength, but he didn't expect that there were such deep mysteries hidden in it. It seems like you understand. Then I don't need to give you the choice of clinging to a strong person, right? In response, Ron smiled and quickly closed the door. Mom, it's really not easy to get a good night's sleep. After reading the latest entry in Chapter 57, I just want to ask, did you get the point of making personal attacks on me? The rhythm must also follow the basic law. Dasher reiterates once again, I am not a snob. I don't care whether you are an ordinary user reading my book or not. Now it is a free chapter and everyone who comes is a guest. But that guy was watching and cursing at the same time, making personal attacks on me, saying this and that about me, and even bringing harm to my family. Is it okay for me to delete his post and permanently block him and make a few complaints? It's really nice of me that I didn't even post his ID. Okay, let's not talk about these bad topics. Dasha would like to thank all the book list friends for their support. I just found out today that there are already several book lists. In addition, this book will be recommended by category next week. After the strong recommendation, it will be recommended separately. It is finally better than the last book. Dasha will continue to work hard. Finally, I'm rolling on the ground to ask for some recommendations. Your every vote of support is the author's motivation to write. Sincerely. Chapter 64, Dangerous Hell Island. Early the next morning, Ron packed his luggage and walked down to the ground step by step along the roughly modified stairs inside the cave. In fact, he had nothing to pack. He couldn't take any food, medicine, or tools. All he could take away was a thin short-sleeved shirt for new recruits. The swordsmen were better off, as they could bring their own swords. Although Ron had driven Dante away last night with the idea of getting rid of him, he did not deceive him. Whether you can recognize yourself is a key point that is more important than strength, belief, and dream. Only those who can see their own weight can have the opportunity to correct, adjust, and improve. Then use this as the cornerstone to build a high building of strength, belief, and dream. Pure training is the most meaningless. In this dangerous world where people can die at any time and anywhere, judgment is the most important thing. A wrong judgment can have very serious consequences. In addition to being capable and loyal, what's more important for a naval officer is brains. Know what judgments to make in different situations, know what you can and cannot touch, become mature, embrace the world, be as steady as a mountain, and have a strong heart. This is the result the Navy wants to see. This is also the real goal of the test. Hell Island is a huge melting pot with billowing flames. It will use the most cruel methods to forge the recruits into fine steel. As for some dregs, just throw it away. On the deck of the warship, the flying squirrel, who had not slept all night, looked deeply at the recruits who walked out of the room silently and disappeared into the dark stairs, and silently gave his blessings. At 7 o'clock, the colonel in charge of statistics came over and said to Flying Squirrel, "Report. Lieutenant General Flying Squirrel, there are a total of 36 new recruits this time, and 3 of them did not leave on time. One of them claimed that he overslept, and the other 2 had no reason. 3. It seems that yesterday's scene brought them a lot of pressure." The corners of the flying squirrel's mouth twitched a few times, and he wanted to explode, but in the end he sighed and waved his hand, "Got it, arrange it, and let them clean the toilet for 3 months. Yes." The colonel turned around and left without any hesitation after receiving the order. This kind of thing is not surprising. Every time we come to Hell Island, there are always a few people who give up the test because of fear. Giving up the test would mean that all their efforts in the recruit camp would be in vain, and they would have to start from private first class or private second class. Even with the protection of their family, it would be difficult for them to climb up again. In fact, there is one thing the flying squirrel did not tell them: even if they are eliminated, those who persist to the last step and run back to seek shelter can at least become a sergeant. Anyone who gives up directly will be abandoned by the entire Navy's top brass. The stairs were not very long. When Ron walked out of the cave and came to the ground, there was already a large group of people waiting there. Quindonte saw Ron coming out and forced a smile at him, but his expression did not look good. Ron thought about it and knew why, so he stopped and stood with them, looking at the exit. 1, 2, 5. Then. It's 7 o'clock. Dong muttered the time to himself, and the crowd became a little gloomy and unhappy when they heard his words. No matter who they were, they couldn't be happy when their comrades really chose to give up. Over the course of a year or even several years, they trained so hard together, endured so much hardship, and suffered so many injuries. The vows they made to advance and retreat together were all overshadowed by this harsh reality. They made their choice. Now, it's our turn. Dong straightened up and said seriously, I'm a swordsman with a DNG Li of 700, which is enough to deal with most beasts. But I have no experience in surviving in the wild, so I need help. Is there anyone willing to join me? After a long conversation last night, Dante still took this path. This is the path he chose, and no one has the right to interrupt. Soon, someone walked out from the crowd. He was a person with animal-type abilities. Ron was amazed when he saw him transforming back and forth between a monkey and a human on the playground. I am the user of the animal-type monkey fruit, golden monkey form. I am good at climbing trees, my sense of smell and hearing are 3 times that of an average person, and I can even tell if the fruit is poisonous. I can help you. With the first one, there will naturally be a second one. Soon, Dong led a team of 10 people and left towards the east. The rest of the people either choose to train alone or travel in groups of 3 or 5. As for Ron, I am a user of the nature fruit ability, so I am going to find an opponent who can kill me. Seeing Ron with a faint smile on his face, saying shocking words, and stepping towards the barren forest leading to the center of Hell Island, a group of people stood in awe. When we landed on the island yesterday afternoon, everyone saw what kind of land Hell Island is. To the east of it is a tropical rainforest. A huge active volcano spewed tons of magma into the sky, which soon ignited a forest fire. Year after year, the magma cooled and accumulated, and even formed hills as high as 100 meters, all over the place. To the west is an ice field, which seems less dangerous than the east. But when they landed yesterday, 2 giant beasts over 300 meters in size fought fiercely on the ice field, tearing the iceberg apart with their sharp teeth and claws. The winner used a very violent method to twist off the loser's head and smashed it into the sea not far from the warship, causing huge waves. From the thick fur on their bodies, it can be seen that they are not just passers-by, but long-term residents of the ice field. As for the middle of the island, coincidentally, this is a thunderstorm area. It seems that due to the climate on both sides, the lightning here strikes like rain, never stopping. On the sea, they saw a giant snake over a kilometer long coiled on the top of a mountain, but the next moment it was struck by a white lightning column that fell from the sky. The snake, which was lucky enough to survive, screamed and wailed as it fell from the mountain. Then, a swarm of wild beasts emerged from the wild forest and tore it into pieces. The poisonous purple snake blood flowed along the ditch, from the bottom of the mountain to the estuary, and the stench filled the sky. Until now, the number of marine life killed by snake blood poisoning is still increasing. This is Hell Island. A hell on earth that combines extreme climate, ferocious beasts, poison, and plague. Ron chose to go to the most dangerous thunderstorm area for training, and the new recruits had no choice but to send him their blessings. If it were them, even if they wanted to give up, they would have no chance of coming out of the thunderstorm alive. 3 days later, the thunderstorm area was barren. Boom! Snap! A thunderclap filled my ears, and it accurately hit a beetle-like monster. Suddenly, the lightning in the sky was like a flowing river, bombarding the monster. When the lightning dissipated, the monster twitched a few times. He got up as if nothing had happened and continued to kill Ron. Damn, this lightning resistance is too strong. Although Ron didn't look too disheveled at this moment, the fatigue in his eyes was still very obvious. This was his 3rd day deep in the wild forest. Ron had only eaten 1 piece of meat in 3 days, and his eyes were bloodshot from hunger. At first, he thought that he would be able to handle this thunderstorm area with ease with the help of the thunder fruit, but the facts soon gave him a slap in the face. Not to mention being able to do it with ease, he now has to be very careful when discharging electricity to avoid getting burned. His thunder fruit was completely restrained here. It's not that he can't use it, but once he uses his ability, the thunder in the sky will be attracted by the electric current he generates and concentrate on bombing his location. As a lightning man, although Ron can ensure that he will not be struck to death by lightning, he is unable to move at all under the intensive bombardment of powerful electric currents in nature. As the user of the thunder fruit, he is an oversized lightning rod, and disaster strikes wherever he goes, including himself. Moreover, there are no plants in the wild forest, and no edible tubers can be found even if you dig 3 feet into the ground. In fact, those trees have been dead for a long time, but the high temperature of lightning has baked them into a strange and hard crystal, so they can stand firm. At this point, some people may ask, what should the animals eat in this barren forest with no grass? The answer is of course meat. So a new question arises. Lightning strikes from the sky at any time and anywhere in this area. What kind of animals can live and reproduce here? Of course, it's the guys who are incredibly resistant to lightning. Just like this guy in front of me. The mussel beetle was 2 meters tall, with muscles all over its body, a real muscle brother. But its strength of no more than 1000 Dao force was not strong for Ron. In the outside world, it was a kind of thing that could kill a large group of people with a backhand slap. But here, with 30 million volts of electric shock plus the induced lightning bombardment, it just shook its head and twitched a few times and then acted like nothing happened. The piece of meat he ate yesterday was snatched from another wolf-shaped monster with horny sickles on its legs, so he knew that this kind of beetle was edible. But its resistance to electricity was too strong, and its speed of drilling was comparable to that of birds. Without being able to use the power of the fruit at will, the 3 he encountered along the way all escaped, and this was the 4th one. The lightning failed again. Looking at the flesh-like beetle rushing towards him, Ron took a deep breath and simply clenched his fists. Fortunately, I'm not Enelu. If he didn't live on Sky Island but here, he would have starved to death long ago, right? The users of the thunder fruit are incomparably powerful in the outside world, but their only advantage here is that they don't have to worry about dying from unknown AoEs. Other than that, there is nothing. If Enelu were here, starving to death would be his only outcome. He clenched his fists, and his muscles tangled like a python, making his arms look bigger. Then, Ron aimed at the monster's mouthparts, roared, and punched out. Bang! Snap! Boom! The sound of shell cracking and strange stirring was drowned out by thunder, and Ron's fist was inserted into the mouthparts of the other insect and emerged from the top of its head. The white walnut-shaped brain matter and brain fluid made his hands full of slippery and sticky liquid, which looked extremely disgusting. This beetle has an upright ape body structure similar to that of humans, with its chest and biceps clearly visible. From a distance, it looks like a strong man wearing a beetle doll costume. But the 4 extra arms on its ribs and the hideous insect-like organs on its head prove that it is not a human. She. Suffering such a severe blow, the muscular beetle flailed its limbs wildly, trying to break free. Boom! At this moment, Ron grabbed the tender flesh of the beetle's abdomen with his backhand, flipped it over and threw it to the ground, then kicked it again, completely crushing its head. You are dead now. Just like basic attacks restrain all movements, fists restrain all resistances. But the only problem is, who said that the weak spot of insects is their brains? GG. Suddenly, the beetle with muscles completely gone above the neck jumped up, lay on the ground without saying a word, and ran away with 6 legs. Body fluids flowed out from the hole in its neck, spilling all over the place, and its speed was quite amazing. Ron was immediately confused. This feeling of horror is no different from a normal person having his head chopped off, blood gushing out, and then running wildly at a speed that could compete with Bolt in a 100-meter race. He's not even dead yet, are you kidding me? Ron immediately jumped up and ran away. If I don't catch up, I'll have nothing to eat today. Chapter 65, Abyssal Canyon. In the central thunderstorm area, in the wild forest, 2 figures were chasing each other as if they were walking on flat ground. The crystallized tree trunks were as hard as steel, but they were nothing in front of the two violent criminals. They were chasing each other all the way, and there were crackling sounds all the way. Because elemental transformation would attract concentrated lightning bombardment, Ron could only take bus number 11 to chase the muscular beetle in front of him that was still alive and kicking even though it had lost its head. But what to say? Worthy of being a bug? When it lay on the ground and ran with its 6 legs, it was very fast. Ron was surprised to find that he couldn't catch up with it with his 6 style attainments, and could only barely ensure that he would not be left behind. You have to know that the current Ron is not the same as before. Not only is his strength much higher than before, but even if he simply shaves, his speed is still 100 meters in 3 seconds. The result is that even at this speed, I can't catch up at all. Fortunately, without the 2 digging limbs on its head, the beetle could not burrow into the ground to escape, otherwise Ron would really be at a loss. Even the muscular beetles at the bottom of the food chain in the wild forest have the skills of burrowing into the ground and sprinting. No wonder Hell Island is called Hell. It's very difficult to survive here. Just when Ron was getting a little tired of chasing, the barren forest suddenly dispersed and a cliff appeared in front. Hell Island is very large. Ron walked for 3 days, but the mountains in the distance were still far away. In this mountainous area, cliffs are not uncommon. The headless mussel beetle could not see the route ahead, and just rushed forward with its head down, and was about to fall. Wait, fall down! Suddenly, Ron's eyes lit up, and he twisted his body while running and jumped down the slope. Swish, swish! A man and a beetle were more than 10 meters apart, performing a leap of faith on the cliff. Having lost its foothold, the muscular beetle's 6 legs were still flapping, but it could only fall down in vain. At this time, Ron seized the opportunity and turned into lightning to launch himself out. Bang! Ha ha ha! I got you! Ron laughed loudly as he used the cross-lock position to clamp his arms and legs tightly around the beetle. I am no match for you when it comes to running forward, but Mother Earth treats everyone the same when it comes to falling speed. GG. The beetle that lost its head seemed to realize that it had no way to retreat, and began to struggle frantically. But in terms of pure strength, no kidding, Ron's confidence in this aspect was even greater than that of the thunder fruit. No matter how the beetle struggled, Ron seemed to be attached to it and couldn't get free. It was then that Ron discovered that the mussel beetle's vocal organs seemed to grow on its back, so it could still make sounds without a head. Of course, this was not important. The important thing was that he could finally have a full meal today. The thrill of falling at high speed is very scary, but Ron is a user of natural abilities and cannot be killed by the fall. Besides, falling from a high altitude is something you'll get used to the second time. At this moment, a bolt of lightning fell from the sky and hit them. It was the lightning that was attracted by Ron's elemental movement just now. The trajectory of his movement was like a river channel dug in the plain. The guided lightning turned a corner in the air and hit them directly. Tsitsizi! Ron smelled a burnt aroma and suddenly had a premonition. It seems, we won't have to grill later? Then. Boom! In the end. This is a barren rocky area. Due to its great depth, the brightness of the sunlight coming in is totally insufficient and it is pitch black everywhere you look. But in this place that should be shrouded in eternal darkness, there is a glimmer of light today. The light was so dazzling that many creatures in the darkness screamed in fear and ran away from the place. Boom! The man and the insect smashed the hard stone, directly smashing it into pieces. After a while, Ron climbed up from the pit and shook his slightly numb arms. It seems that the iron block training is still very effective. Falling from a height of 1000 meters can't even force out my elemental transformation. The passive effect of elemental transformation is that it will automatically appear as soon as you are injured. Even with the suppression of the 6 iron blocks, it is very easy to show up. Even this can't be forced out, which means that his skin defense in the iron block state has reached an extremely terrifying level, no different from real steel. It's not that Ron doesn't rely on the thunder fruit, he just doesn't want to become a useless person without the thunder fruit. So far, his approach seems to be correct. ZZ. With bursts of lightning, the cracks on Ron's body closed up at a speed visible to the naked eye, and soon they were completely healed, and even his clothes looked brand new. After the self-healing was finished, Ron moved his joints with a click, then picked up a piece of bloody meat from the ground and sniffed it. 70% done. Although the muscular beetles were very resistant to lightning, and I couldn't penetrate their shells without a special move, but the inside of any living thing was fragile, and the lightning that struck from the sky poured in through the hole in the beetle's neck, roasting it from the inside out into a medium-rare barbecue. Ron hadn't eaten enough for 3 days, so he could swallow even a piece of raw meat, let alone medium-rare meat. Kaji. After taking a bite, the unique aroma filled his mouth, and the gravy stirred in his mouth, a little salty, but more moist. This feeling was similar to the dark food he had eaten before, charcoal grilled watermelon. But it was chewier than that, and the deliciousness and fullness of protein could not be replaced by fruit. Still the familiar taste. Not bad. Ron uttered a syllable comfortably through his nose, biting the meat in big mouthfuls. Then he sat on the ground, tore off pieces of muscle from the broken muscle beetle, and chewed them into pieces. At the bottom of the dark canyon, the heart-pounding chewing sound kept echoing, and the scene was truly scary. An unprecedented fragrance permeated the empty darkness, and a few brave creatures began to approach. Ron's ears suddenly moved, and he waved his hand to send out a bolt of lightning. Boom! He didn't use the elementalization just now to heal the hole in his clothes. When he came to the bottom of the canyon, for the first time Ron no longer felt that he was surrounded by dense ions, so he tested it and found that using lightning at the bottom of the canyon would indeed not cause a thunderstorm, so he started to act without fear. Shishi. After the thunder, a centipede-like insect struggled on the ground for a few times and curled up in pain. I see. Is it because of the different environment? But I can't eat it. The centipede was more than 3 meters long, and like a beetle, it was a muscular man, completely different from a normal exoskeleton creature. But the liquid flowing out of its body could corrode pits in rocks and emit a pungent stench. Regardless of the quality of its meat, this dignity and toxicity alone were enough to make Ron give up the idea of eating it. The creatures on the ground are not poisonous, but they are extremely resistant to lightning. The creatures at the bottom of the canyon are very weak in lightning resistance, but they are highly toxic. What an island full of malice! The death of the centipede made the creatures that were ready to move in the darkness quite fearful. Ron ate and drank slowly, then took off his clothes, tied them into a bag and threw the uneaten meat into it. If the creatures here are as poisonous as the centipede, these pieces of meat will be his only source of food before he climbs up. Let's go first. What if there is another exit? Ron carried the bag made of clothes on his shoulders, used his own power to illuminate the way ahead, and randomly chose a path to move forward. Half an hour after he left the place, the creatures in the darkness seemed to be sure that this place was safe, and swarmed over in an instant, devouring the bones and centipede corpses that Ron had left behind. But soon, a huge figure rushed over, opening its mouth wide enough to swallow a small house. The surrounding insects were sucked into the mouth before they could escape. After a few crisp crunching sounds, 2 green lights flashed in the darkness, staring at the direction Ron left. Hissing. An inexplicable rustling sound was heard, and the surroundings were completely silent. Even those poisonous insects did not dare to make a sound at this moment. If there was light here, a white-scaled snake over 200 meters long would appear. It stared at Ron silently, with a cold look in its pupils. Then, with a buzzing sound from the friction of stones, the white-scaled snake coiled up and prepared to sleep. Must eat him. But not now. The white-scaled snake's low IQ told it that Ron was not easy to deal with. Ron probably didn't expect that the opponent he went deep into the wilderness to find was right behind him. The three fatal factors of Hell Island, food, poison, and climate, these 3 points are not too big a problem for Ron, but how to find a strong opponent to hone himself is the real difficulty. The huge white snake we saw on the day of landing was several times larger than the 2 monsters on the ice field in size alone. The strongest creature on Hell Island is most likely this white snake. This is also the reason why he chose to advance through the thunderstorm area. Chapter 66 The Limit is Coming. Half a month later, in the lava field in the eastern part of Hell Island, a fiery red lizard crawled up from under the charred tree trunk, shook its head and tried to leave. But at this moment, a big hand reached out from behind it and grabbed it tightly with lightning speed. Then the owner of the fist stretched out his thumb and hit it on the neck. Click! Afterwards, the owner threw it into his mouth without doing anything else, chewing it with a crunching sound and swallowing the blood. In this lava zone, any trace of water is precious. This is the lava zone, everyone be careful. Although there are no very strong monsters, the natural disasters of the volcano are more terrifying than monsters. This person is Quinn Dante. Compared with half a month ago, he is undoubtedly a little more wild now. The clothes on his body had already been taken away for processing and used as bandages and weaving. Cloth was a very important material here. Although it was much more comfortable than the fur on his body that had not yet dissipated the stench, as a leader, he could not just enjoy it, but his ultimate goal was to lead everyone to survive. Dong had never imagined that he would one day accept a life of not taking a bath for half a month, eating raw lizards, and drinking raw meat and blood. As the eldest son of the Quinn family, he had been living a life of luxury since childhood and had never suffered from hardship. But in just half a month, he got used to it. Hell Island taught him the rules of survival here. If you don't want to die, just do it. As Dong gave orders, his companions nodded silently and began to look for a clean cave and prepare dinner according to their respective tasks. It's not that they are not interested in talking, but in this area, there is a blind strange bird with very powerful hearing. Their body heat is enough to ignite trees, and they come and go as fast as the wind, flying like a living firestorm. One of their companions was taken away by it because he spoke too loudly. That was the first time the team lost a member, and although there was no second time, the sight of their companions being pierced through the shoulder by the claws and wailing away had a great impact on them. Dante, the area where the magma flows is safe, but the air is poisonous and the water supply is insufficient. A man came over and reported in a low voice. Have you finished drinking the water from the last rain? There's only 1 bucket left, and it can only last 3 days at most. Oh, let me think about it. Dong sighed sadly and spat out the chewed grass stalks in his mouth. Although the grass juice was bitter, it was a good source of water. Before actually stepping into it, who would have thought that this seemingly fertile primeval forest actually had so little edible food? The mushrooms on the tree trunks were poisonous, the roots in the soil were poisonous, the small animals caught in the traps were also poisonous. The entire jungle was built up with poison and fire. The freshwater resources are occupied by several powerful wild beasts, making it difficult to even get a drink of water. Dong now has to consider all aspects of the problem. The survival pressure of a group of people has accumulated on him, making him a little breathless. Or, have you given up? When I get home, I'll have good food and drink, a warm bed to sleep in, no need to fight wild beasts, no need to walk on the road in fear every day, no need. Do not. Absolutely not. Boom. Suddenly, Dong punched the semi-solidified magma in front of him. He felt a sharp pain and his confused eyes instantly became clear. As his companions stared in horror, he raised his severely burned fist, his face grim, and said, "We must seize a water source. Otherwise, we will all die." As soon as these words were spoken, the air became quiet for a while, and then a strong murderous aura rose up. Everyone lowered their voices and roared. Yes. Similar situations to the one faced by Dante could be seen everywhere on Hell Island. The volcanoes that erupted on time every day, the fighting that never stopped on the ice field, and the dense thunderstorms in the wild forests all squeezed the physical and mental limits of these new recruits. They ate raw meat and drank blood. They smeared feces all over their bodies and even on their lips to avoid being chased. They bit wild beasts for a bite of food. The purpose is just to survive. Now half a month has passed and the most difficult time has arrived. The tense nerves are overwhelmed, and everyone is faced with difficult choices all the time. Should they grit their teeth and persevere, or give up and return? East Coast Cave, Naval Base. In the open space, the flying squirrel was half naked, slashing down with his sword in a serious manner. Through hard training, he maintained his fighting power. He was a veteran who had been promoted to Vice Admiral of the headquarters 30 years ago, and a veteran of the Navy. He knew that he had no hope of making a breakthrough in this lifetime, but as long as justice still needed him, he was ready to go to the battlefield at any time. Drink. Another sword slashed down, and the flying squirrel suddenly stopped, turned around and asked, "What's the situation?" "Yes. Vice Admiral Flying Squirrel." The visitor was a naval colonel who was responsible for monitoring the new recruits who were training on the island. Of course, they were not a safety measure for the new recruits, but just a group of cold and heartless spectators who recorded what the new recruits did every day and then made statistical evaluations. After all, too dangerous. Even if a recruit is found to be in life-threatening danger, no one can rush to rescue them, and they have to rely on themselves for everything. Moreover, surveillance is not all-encompassing. The dangerous environment on the island makes it difficult for the hard-working den mushi to survive. At most, they set up a small number of surveillance den mushi in the relatively safe areas outside the island. It often takes several days to see a new recruit appear on the screen. Deeper places and some dangerous places cannot be detected. The colonel came to report at this time because half a month had passed and someone finally broke away from the periphery and stepped into the empty dark forest. Oh? Which kid is so brave? Haven't the creatures outside made them suffer enough? The flying squirrel was a little curious. Hell Island was a place of life and death that even a strong man like him was afraid of. The beast kings on the periphery alone were enough for the new recruits to deal with. You know, every beast king has the power of 3,000 Dao points. Not to mention the various monsters living in the hinterland and central areas of the island. Except for one person's death on the third day after departure, no reduction in personnel was detected for such a long time afterwards. It is conceivable that these little guys should have understood this a long time ago, right? This. The colonel hesitated, and after a pause he said, "It was Ron. He walked out of the canyon, and then we found that he had left the outer area. It turns out to be him." The flying squirrel knew why the colonel hesitated, because Ron's strength was too strong. In this world where the strong are respected, it would be a bit embarrassing not to add the honorific title of colonel. There are few monsters in the wild forest area, but they are the strongest, and the lightning in the sky is fatal. It is a real forbidden zone for life. To be honest, ever since Hell Island replaced Thunder God Island as the designated location for survival training, no recruit has successfully conquered the wasteland area in all these years. Smoker, the user of the natural smoke fruit ability who attracted much attention in the past few years, was only lingering on the outskirts of the wasteland and did not dare to go deep into it easily. But according to the few den mushi they saw, the monsters that were once enough to pick off a group of new recruits could only become food to be chased by Ron. Especially on the second day of the departure, he was so hungry that he actually snatched a piece of meat from the mouth of a gregarious wolf, which made the flying squirrel's mouth twitch. The desolate forest that seemed like a dead end was like a playground to Ron. What a terrifying power this is! Not to mention the new recruits, even many well-known naval generals could not do it as easily as Ron. Later, in order to catch up with the escaping Thunder Beetle, he fell into the Abyss Canyon and disappeared. The flying squirrel knew that Ron would not fall to his death, but it was unknown when he would be able to get out. Unexpectedly, Wait! He actually walked out. The flying squirrel's eyes widened instantly. The deepest part of the Abyss Canyon is only 1,300 meters, and the underground cave is less than 2,000 meters. He never thought of crawling out? What did he eat and drink in the past half-month? The colonel was stunned for a moment, and replied, according to the footage from the den mushi we planted at the deepest point, Ron came out chewing on a young thunder mosquito. Although he quickly ran behind a rock and had diarrhea, he was in good spirits. Thunder mosquito cub. Isn't that a maggot? Is that thing edible? Although its toxicity is not as strong as that of the thunder mosquito, it is also highly poisonous. And many more. The corner of the flying squirrel's mouth twitched suddenly, and he recalled some descriptions of Ron in the information. In addition to the commonplace issues such as talent, perseverance, and contribution, there was also this one. Possessing an extremely terrifying recovery ability, as long as the food provides enough energy, most fatal injuries can be ignored. This was a report from Zifa. He once saw with his own eyes that Ron's ribs were stuck in his internal organs and he was half dead. Then he straightened the ribs himself, and he was fine after half a day. Now it seems that this information can be supplemented with another item. It can even decompose toxins with its own healing ability, reducing or eliminating toxin reactions. Okay? How did Ron's bones get stuck in his internal organs? This question is a matter of opinion. What a monster! The flying squirrel smacked his lips, smiled bitterly and shook his head. Forget it, leave him alone. That brat is even more perverted than Kuzan and the other three. He can't die. Yeah, I think so. At this moment, there was a noise outside. The flying squirrel turned his head and saw a humanoid creature with a tattered body and covered in blood walking into the cave from the stairs and then falling to the ground. Quick! Medics, prepare for surgery, there is heavy internal bleeding. Seeing this, the flying squirrel closed his eyes and asked, has it started? Chapter 67 Going deep into the hinterland. The first 3 days and half a month of the Hell Island survival experience are the most difficult. Because of the lack of experience and information, everyone was in a state of groping in the first 3 days, and deaths and injuries occurred in these 3 days. And 3 days of not getting a drop of water was the last limit for maintaining combat effectiveness. If they could survive through it, it meant that they were qualified to survive on this island. But I'm just qualified. How can the ignorant young sprouts compete with the wild beasts that have lived here for generations? They are still in trouble, with food shortages, scarce fresh water, and wild animal attacks. If they want to survive, they must be on their toes all the time. But being on their toes all the time will bring great pressure to their body and mind. Under this condition, 15 days will be a watershed. When the first wounded returned, the curtain of abandoned soldiers was drawn, and more people came back. Some of them were too seriously injured to survive on the island, some had mental breakdowns and fainted after returning to the base. But no matter what the reason was, it could not change the fact that they were eliminated. But only 5, surprisingly few. Looking at the abandoned recruits whose emotions were gradually stabilizing under the care of the soldiers, Flying Squirrel touched the hilt of his sword. Are these little devils going to break the record? According to past experience, the elimination rate of Hell Island special training is as high as 60%. 20% of them will die, and 40% will gradually give up as time goes by. Especially on the 50th day, the recruits' mental and physical strength have reached a limit. Percent of those who give up will come back today, but now look. The Flying Squirrel pulled open the document and examined it carefully. There are 36 new recruits participating in the Hell Island survival training this time. As of 15 days, 1 person died, 5 people gave up, and 6 people were eliminated. Even if we follow past data and there will be 5 more people who give up in the future, the total number of eliminations will only be 11, just over 30%. If they do it, it will be the best result ever. Haha, they are all great. The flying squirrel threw the documents into the drawer, took out a cigar after a long time, and began to sip it happily. Ron didn't care how many people were eliminated or whether the records of his predecessors would be broken. In his eyes, this test has only two outcomes, passing or death. Even if there is a huge danger, he will go forward bravely. Knowing there is a tiger in the mountain, he still goes there. That's his character. If he doesn't walk in a straight line, that is, he's lost. The moment he walked out of the canyon, Ron knew that he had either entered the central area of the island or had accidentally run to another area. Because here, all the thunderstorms in the sky disappeared, replaced by a dense primitive jungle. Completely different from the crystallized forest in the wasteland before, this was a fertile soil full of vitality. So Ron got lost. Taking advantage of the fact that there was no thunderstorm to interfere, he flew to a high altitude to look around and found that the canyon was already covered with lush greenery, and the barren forest seemed to have never existed. He wanted to fly higher, but a thunderbolt from the sky told him that this place was a no-fly zone. Shit! Which way to go next? Standing on two forest paths trampled by giant beasts, Ron looked at the two forks in the road before him, his mouth twitching. It was the same thing yesterday. He closed his eyes and chose a path. After walking for a while, he suddenly realized that something was wrong. I have seen this scenery before. Then he jumped up and found that he had gone around in a big circle and returned to the starting point. So today he changed his route, but the good times didn't last long. Now, he had to make another difficult choice. Ron had a feeling that if he continued to choose blindly based on his luck, he might not be able to find the terrifying white snake by the end of 3 months. Rustle. At this time, a noise came from the depths of the dense forest. Even experienced hunters would find it difficult to detect such a subtle movement, but it could not escape Ron Thunderman's keen perception of the magnetic field. It's a big one. The next moment, a burly figure about 5 or 6 meters long rushed out of the forest and rushed towards him. Roar! Clouds follow the dragon and wind follows the tiger. The deafening roar and the strong wind sounded at the same time, so fierce. This is a tiger. Once the king of the forests on earth, the cat's reaction speed and muscle strength due to their size mean they have no natural enemies. However, in this strange and mysterious world of One Piece, this tiger is clearly not doing well. The king character on its forehead was torn off in half by its claws, and the tear only stopped at its mouth. There was a row of neat teeth marks on its waist and abdomen, and it was obvious that in the eyes of some beings, it was just a piece of food. But in the tiger's opinion, it was enough to deal with the hairless monkey in front of it. It had eaten a lot of hairy monkeys before, so it just had to be careful not to let them climb up the tree. Ouch! Just as he was thinking about it, the tiger suddenly felt that he had stopped falling. His huge claws were on the hairless monkey's shoulders, but he couldn't fall down. What's the situation? Why am I flying? Wait, something is wrong. The tiger looked down and saw a hand ruthlessly inserted into its chest. The arm supported its entire weight of several tons, but it was as firm as steel. Before the stinging pain spread throughout its body, it heard the hairless monkey say, "I am sure and certain, tigers are not poisonous." Puff, swish. As the arm was retracted, a long stream of blood gushed out from the wound. The tiger opened its eyes wide and wanted to escape, but found that its limbs seemed to have disappeared and it had no strength to use. It could only fall to the ground helplessly, its eyes full of confusion. Why? It was the electric current. I used the electric current. Ron squatted down and rummaged through the rag package, taking out a beetle shell and a few pairs of crudely made chopsticks, then explained to Tiger, "The brain controls the body by stimulating nerve endings with bioelectricity, and I injected current into your body, interfering with the flow of bioelectricity, so your body is now out of control." Clang! Ron took out a large guillotine that the Kenyan mantis had provided and said with a smile, "Okay, please get going, Brother Tiger." This smile is the smile of death. Creak. Ouch. The slaughtering method that allows the prey to completely relax allows the blood to drain out, so that the taste will not be affected. Therefore, Ron strongly supports the painless slaughtering proposal advocated by the Animal Protection Association. Ending the lives of cattle and sheep without any pain is not only kind, but also crucial to improving the quality of the meat. In the past, when slaughtering domestic pigs in rural areas, the red knife went in and the white knife came out. The pigs struggled wildly in pain, resulting in blood threads in the meat that looked like red hemp rope. It would be strange if this kind of meat tasted good. After some effort to cook the tiger, Ron, who was well fed, pulled off the entire tiger skin and dried it. He then used plant tendons and stone needles to sew a few bags. The rag pockets made from shirts were often not enough, and the insect exoskeleton was too hard to be used as a weapon, so a tiger skin was just right. As a madman who constantly challenges himself, Ron is very familiar with surviving in the wild. So he knows very well that you should never underestimate any craft in the wild. The simplest sewing and mending here can produce 100 times higher effect than in the civilized world. However, this place is not Earth after all, and most of the previous knowledge of survival in the wild is useless, especially the anatomy of plants and animals, which is completely useless. So Ron had to spend time to familiarize himself with the wild of this world again, and he even made a joke of being hungry. Now half a month has passed, and the big devil Ron, who left a blacklist record in countless ecological protection areas, is back. After eating and drinking, Ron happily climbed up the tree and began his daily practice. But at a certain moment, his gaze looked back deeply and distantly, and then he retracted his gaze. Something was following him, for a full half-month. As a wilderness survival expert, Ron couldn't have failed to notice this. But every time when he turned around to attack, the opponent was able to avoid him and not notice him. But since he didn't attack directly, it proved that the other party was also afraid of him. Or maybe he was not sure of a one-shot kill and wanted to try to get an advantage. Wouldn't it be easier this way? In another half-month, when I reach the latest level, we slow play. Chapter 68 Battle for Survival. The biggest improvement that life on Hell Island brought to Ron was not in his physical strength, but in the tempering of his soul. In this land full of dangers, human nature will shrink infinitely, and the wildness hidden in the genes will begin to become active. Coupled with the powerful fighting power of the creatures on the island, once the fire of wildness is ignited, only death can extinguish it. Ron had felt before that his strength was improving slower and slower, and now the effect of each training session was almost zero. He knew that this was his limit. As a human being, you have your limits. This thing is everywhere and will even follow humans throughout their lives, from birth to death, and no one can avoid it. And Ron's limit is now. However, breaking through limits is not something high-end, nor is it the only thing. Looking back on life, there are so many limits that can be broken. For example, some people say that before a person dies, he or she will review his or her life in a flash, just like walking through a scene. Let me ask, is this realistic? Ron, who had nearly died countless times, could pat his chest and say, reality. Different from the judgment of subjective consciousness, when the body realizes that it is about to die and cannot survive, your body makes its own judgment, and the shackles deep in the brain will be broken. At that moment, the human thinking ability will be thousands of times stronger than usual. Time seems to slow down, allowing people to review their lives in a short moment. Some things you thought you had forgotten will be unearthed by the active thinking at that moment. Being able to accomplish something before death that you cannot normally do is proof that you have broken through your limits. This ability to accelerate thinking before death is the common limit of human beings, and it cannot be broken until the moment of death. This is also the reason why many protagonists often have a flash of inspiration when facing death, just like Conan stepped on the switch and lived towards death. Of course, although Ron, who had been on the verge of death several times, knew this, he could never replicate it. His body did not allow that kind of situation to happen. At most, every time he crawled back from the brink of death, his reaction speed, memory, and other related abilities would be slightly enhanced. In addition, when learning fighting skills, even if a fist hits the bridge of the nose, the master will ask the apprentice to open his eyes. Because closing your eyes during a fight is a very dangerous thing. Not only will it not provide any protection, but it will put you in greater danger. But people will subconsciously close their eyes when facing danger. This is a genetic instinct inherited to protect fragile organs. This is also the limit of human beings. When the apprentice can remain unmoved and open his eyes wide to look for a chance to survive even when facing a big knife chopping down his head, he has broken through his limits. For example, when you are extremely tired, insist on studying for 2 hours, or grit your teeth and do 50 more push-ups than last time. These are all examples of pushing the limits, because you are doing something you couldn't do before. So it is not something high-end. To put it bluntly, it is a kind of shit, piss, and fart. It is the accumulation of these tiny bits of shit, piss, and farts that lead to the so-called growth and maturity. Then, humans have their limits, and different people have different limits. Or the upper limit. The reason why talent is unreasonable is that it determines a person's upper limit. It determines at what point you will encounter bottlenecks, and you must break through the limit to move forward. While other mediocre people are desperately breaking through their own limits and chasing after their dreams, those with outstanding talents have already stepped into new fields. Except for lazy people. From a heart patient who couldn't carry anything on his shoulders or hands, to a world-famous self-mutilation maniac, and was madly worshipped by sports enthusiasts all over the world, Ron has already broken through his limits hundreds of times. He had never known where his next level would be, because he found that after coming to this world, he seemed to be able to become stronger without limit. But this was not a system text, and his body was his original body, so Ron knew very well that no matter how strong he became, he was still an ordinary person. Since you are an ordinary person, you must face your own limits. Life on Hell Island was completely different from what he had before. For a bite of meat, he could endure the venomous insects crawling around on his body until the edible prey appeared. When he withdrew from civilized society and the wildfire deep in his genes was rekindled, Ron found that his barriers began to loosen slowly. He was sure that his Deo power value had not increased at all during this period, and it was the change in his mind that allowed him to touch the door. As long as you keep going, breaking the shackles will be a natural result. Until then, I hope you can satisfy me, little one. Ron opened his mouth and muttered something. In the pitch-black night, a murderous intent suddenly rose up, and all the animals in the forest that sensed this breath immediately fled madly, fearing that they would attract the attention of the murderous owner. And in the depths of the dense forest several kilometers away from Ron, a white-scaled snake swallowed a wild boar, and the next moment it trembled all over, raised its long snake head, and roared at the moon. Hiss! Well, being a snake, its roar was barely audible and did not catch Ron's attention. A few days later, in the eastern area, near the magma zone. Plop, plop! As the giant crocodile, covered in blood, turned over and sank to the bottom of the water, the frantically attacking small crocodiles began to flee in all directions, and the recruits numbly dropped their weapons and sat on the ground. Quindanti rushed to the front, slashing woodenly, and only realized after a few seconds that there were no enemies around. He lowered his head and stared blankly at his hands. The animal blood and human blood formed into plagues, staining the sword red. We won. Then, his eyes swept over his exhausted companions, and the next moment he suddenly gripped his sword, his face flushed, and shouted. Justice will prevail. Justice! Justice will prevail! This is a freshwater lake occupied by the king of beasts, the crocodile. Even though the cheering at this time attracted the attention of the strange bird, it did not dare to approach easily. On the western ice field, 3 soldiers who were traveling together panted and crawled out from under the belly of a white bear that was more than 30 meters tall. They looked at the corpse in front of them with some astonishment in their eyes. Then, an indescribable sense of satisfaction and wildness spread in their chests, making them howl to the sky like wild wolves, venting their joy. At this moment, the same thing is happening in various places on the island, announcing that the remaining 25 people from the Navy headquarters recruit camp have officially transformed from ignorant survivors into a complete integration into this hell, becoming the Soul Lords dominating the island. Capturing this scene through Den Den Mushi, the Flying Squirrel and a group of abandoned recruits in the base clenched their fists at the same time. Beautiful! They did it! When he saw Dong leading his team to challenge the Beast King on the island because of the pressure of survival, he was more nervous than anyone else. Because in historical records, once such a challenge is launched, it will never stop, and it will only determine life and death. The reason why the death rate of new recruits in history is the highest is that, like them, they challenge the inherent overlord on the island for survival. This is a dangerous thing, but it must be done. On Hell Island, resources are very limited and cannot support too many creatures. In order to reproduce, many mothers would even kill the weaker cubs at birth, leaving only the strongest one, to reduce the amount of food they need to bring back. As for secreting maternal hormones during childbirth and letting the mother wolf raise the baby as her own, such a thing does not exist on this island. Food and fresh water, each one is precious. For a piece of meat or a mouthful of water, all creatures will risk their lives to fight for it. Take away the vitality of others so that you can survive. To feed a team of 9 people, all of whom are little superhumans with physical strength more than 30 times that of ordinary people, the demand for survival supplies is an extremely terrifying number. Dong Te must either give up and disband the team, or challenge the Beast King. Then, he succeeded. After feeling relaxed, the Flying Squirrel's usually serious and calm face was filled with an undisguised smile. As long as they successfully challenge the Beast King, it basically means they have survived. Beast Kings of the same level will not attack other freshwater sources without thinking, because in the law of the jungle, injury equals death. Wild beasts rely on the psychology of seeking benefits and avoiding harm, which is 100 times stronger than that of humans, to survive from generation to generation. I survived. That's great! Ha 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 ha! Hearty laughter echoed in the cave, and the eliminated soldiers blushed, but they were not jealous. Without practice, there is no right to speak. They are people who have experienced the hellish environment on the island, so they know very well how difficult it is for Dong to do such a thing. Not to mention, not knowing what they were thinking of, several guys turned their eyes to their companion who looked ashen. What's more, compared to those of them who were forced into a desperate situation and had to come back, the 3 of them who gave up and didn't even dare to step into the forest were the real shame. Chapter 69, The Beast King, the Giant Ape. It was hot and humid in the dense jungle. Ron lay on the ground, letting the mosquitoes crawl and fly all over his body, and moved forward bit by bit under the cover of ferns. Not far in front of him, by the valley, a well-fed gorilla was basking in the sun, turning over from time to time to crush the beasts that wanted to attack it. This is a real big gorilla. One finger is longer than Ron is tall. If it squats on the ground and doesn't move, it looks no different from a hairy hillside. As he went deeper into the jungle, Ron knew he was getting closer and closer to the core area of the island. It was not a surprise that the tiger he had killed for meat would attack him, but because the tiger's strength was only suitable for living on the edge of the jungle, and he had intruded into its territory. In this jungle, every time the animals travel a certain distance, their strength will leap forward. Ron could clearly feel that it took a lot of effort to kill a wild boar, from being able to kill a tiger easily at the beginning. So he decided to stop for the time being and hunt the powerful beasts here one by one to hone himself. After all, this place is still a long distance away from the high mountain we saw when we landed. There is no doubt that the 1,000-meter-long white snake that can dominate there is extremely powerful. The big guy in front of him was the strongest beast king in this area. It occupied this valley and did not share it with any other creatures. Because as long as there was fresh water, wild animals that wanted to survive would come from all directions and then be killed and eaten by it. The last time Ron came to find water to drink, he was attacked by it and flew away for several kilometers. Fortunately, I had the elemental protection to avoid being seriously injured. So he wanted to launch a sneak attack to show it that he was not someone to be trifled with. Gradually, Ron came to a place less than 30 meters away from the gorilla. He tried to raise his head, but all he could see was fur, and he couldn't see the gorilla's head at all. To the beast king in front of him, Ron was as small as a bug. But bugs also have their own dignity. You kicked my butt last time, and this time it's my turn. Zzz. Suddenly, there was a strong and piercing noise, like thousands of birds chirping. Ron poured lightning into his right foot, and the powerful current escaped uncontrollably, forming a lightning ball. Then he took a deep breath, suddenly jumped up, and swept his right foot forward towards the gorilla's butt. Overload lightning. Bang! Before he could kick, a huge shadow fell from the sky and knocked him to the ground in an instant. Suddenly, a circle of visible mud waves spread outward, rolling endlessly. All the tall trees and rocky slopes along the way were destroyed by this impact. So fast. Feeling the unique sensation of his body being shattered, Ron sank into the mud, his eyes wide open. The thing that knocked him flying was nothing but a slap from the gorilla. At the moment when he jumped up to attack, the gorilla, who was leaning against him, turned around and swung his arm, accurately slapping him into the ground. It sounds simple enough, but what kind of speed is this? Ron has always been a bully with his speed, so he knows exactly how fast he is. To be frank, when he bursts out with all his strength, he is not afraid of anyone in the world except Kizaru. Even though he is attacking with his body and therefore has no elemental movement, his speed in overload mode is faster than most Navy generals. But who would have thought that even at such a speed, he would be caught by the giant monster in front of him that was as big as a mountain? Instead, it slapped him into the ground with a backhand at a speed faster than him, as if it were slapping a fly. Hwalala, rustling. At this time, the huge hand slowly lifted up, dirt and gravel rolled to the ground, revealing a confused Ron in the palm print. The gorilla was also puzzled, and kept making doubtful sounds, because it found that it had slapped the little guy, but the little guy didn't die. What's the situation? Just as it was puzzled, Ron suddenly pushed the ground and disappeared in the blink of an eye. Teleport. The next moment, he had already reached a high altitude, and raised his fist towards the back of the gorilla's head. Spots of light appeared all over his body, his eyes were bright, like a god or a demon. Overload mode, 100 million volts. Take my punch. Boom. The dull impact was like a muffled thunder, and the strong wind it stirred up was so violent that it crushed the trees. But Ron was not happy, because his fist was blocked. Seeing the gorilla turning around in an instant before the attack arrived, clenching his fist with 2 fingers, with obvious disdain in his eyes, Ron smiled slightly, took the initiative to move closer, and hugged the gorilla's fingers. 100 million volts, big generator. Boom, boom. A pillar of light suddenly appeared in the air. The pure white color was the destructive thunder produced by the extreme concentration of lightning. A channel appeared between the earth and the sky at the same time, and everything in between was turned into dust by the destructive power of lightning. The gorilla suddenly felt a sharp pain in his fingers and subconsciously let go of his hand, but the power of the lightning spread along his arm to his whole body, making him howl in pain. Roar! A strong wind blew in my face, mixed with an unbearable stench. Is it just a broken finger? Seeing this, Ron frowned and teleported behind the gorilla's head again. The latter was able to break free from his sudden thunder attack in an instant, which was enough to show how terrifying its physique was. The scene of being knocked away was still vivid in Ron's mind. He was not stupid enough to compete with the gorilla in strength. His real killer move is all in the thunder fruit. He will make full use of the advantages of lightning. Boom! Clench your fists and thunder explodes. This time there was no thought of revenge, just a pure fight. Ron rushed forward and punched hard. Overload lightning fist. Bang! The lightning fist with penetrating killing power mercilessly pierced into the back of the gorilla's head. Before the blood could flow out, the lightning contained in it suddenly burst out and dispersed, burning the wound into charcoal. The next moment, the giant beast in front of him, which was 200 meters tall, suddenly felt dizzy and fell forward limply. This punch was able to work because of the residual effect of the giant generator. Not only was the gorilla's finger roasted into powder, but the strong electric current remaining in its body also interfered with its movements, making it unable to turn around as flexibly as before. For speed-type opponents, the paralyzing ability of lightning can often have a more powerful effect than simple lethality. Well, although it is hard to imagine that a 200-meter tall gorilla with a face full of tendons would be a speed player, but in the world of One Piece, there are all kinds of things. At this moment, there was a dull thud and a large area of jungle was knocked to the ground. Sure enough, it won't be that easy. Ron lowered his head slightly, looked at the gorilla who took a step forward to support his body, and took a deep breath, then continue. After saying that, he turned into a bolt of lightning and pounced on the gorilla again. At the same time, the extremely angry gorilla mobilized the huge muscle strength in his body, turned around and punched out. Bang! Fug! Ron felt that what was coming at him was not a fist, but a meteorite. His fist was completely unable to resist and was instantly shattered. Caught off guard, he was immediately shattered into countless lightning snakes, and flew away several kilometers with the strong wind. Simple, brutal, and effective, this is how gorillas fight. Its power and speed completely refreshed Ron's understanding of power. Call. After finally stabilizing his body, Ron used the elemental power of the thunder fruit to float in the air, his face filled with fighting spirit. That's great! Come again! Swish, swish, swish! The gorilla quickly flew back to the battlefield with the help of teleportation. Seeing that this punch still failed to kill the bug in front of him, he felt insulted and became furious. Roar! Come on! Let's see who falls first! Ron swooped down with a laugh, suddenly turned flexibly to avoid the gorilla's straight punch, and seized the opportunity to hit it on the chin with a punch. Woohoo! The gorilla cried out in pain and tilted its head back. But before Ron could be happy, its left hand also hit Ron from below, sending him high into the air. Then, Ron teleported back and kicked it in the temple. In this dense primeval forest, the man and the beast began an endless fight with each other using the most violent means. End of this chapter. Chapter 70 1 million volt Hell Ape. Chapter 70, 100 million volts, Hellish Ape. At the same time, in the eastern area, on the top of a high mountain. Dante, do you think the lightning there is weird? Standing on the highest mountain in the east, most of Hell Island was in sight. Everyone realized that the area they had been living in was just the periphery of Hell Island. The volcano, the ice field, and the wild forest, the three great wastelands surrounded the dense forest in the center of the basin, which was the real core of Hell Island. However, they could not even get close to the edge of the Jedi, because the closer they were to the central area, the more terrifying the number and strength of the Beast Kings became, not to mention entering the basin. Dongt and his companions came to seek revenge, because the giant bird that killed their companions lived on this mountain. But before they could find the bird, the lightning flashing in the basin in the distance attracted their attention. Normally lightning strikes from the sky, so people don't have time to pay attention to it. But the lightning there rushed from the ground to the sky, like a thundercloud falling to the ground, which attracted their attention. It's Ron. Dong Te was silent for a moment and then said, he must be fighting with some beast. It turns out it was him. Everyone suddenly realized. Indeed, if it was Ron, then it would not be surprising that lightning would rush from the ground to the sky. What the hell? Where is he? That's the center of the basin, the hinterland of the hinterland. Countless beast kings blocked their way, and they couldn't even enter the basin. How could Ron have gone there? And judging from the situation, it seems like it is fighting vigorously with some creature. Do you want to be so perverted? How can we play with such a huge gap? For a moment, everyone fell silent and stared at the raging thunder and lightning in the distance with admiration and fear. The location of the lightning was a long way from the basin. If he guessed correctly, Ron must have killed his way there. While they were still racking their brains for survival in the periphery, someone had already entered the center and was fighting with even more terrifying beasts. This is Ron, the scariest monster of them all. Perhaps, it will be the most terrifying monster in the history of the recruit camp. The monsters in the wild forest are very scary. Two companions who couldn't survive in the ice field brought back a message when they approached the east. In the wild forest, you can't survive even if you avoid lightning, because they didn't find any weaklings who can fight alone in the wild forest. The mussel beetle that is used as a food source by various creatures was hunted by the two of them at the risk of their lives. This news made Dongt and others understand that even in the outer areas, the difficulty level was different. Compared with the wasteland and the ice field, this tropical jungle where people can barely survive as long as they avoid danger is already a paradise. Ron took the most difficult path, and advanced countless times faster than them. This gap. It's really despairing. Dongt shook his head, then tightened his grip on the sword at his waist and turned away. Don't just stand there. Our purpose is not to watch Ron's performance. Everyone woke up in shock and clenched their weapons with murderous intent. Yes. Take my punch, blade. Seeing that Ron's punch missed, the gorilla did not rush to fight back. Because on Ron's elbow, a 10-meter-long knife made of endless lightning was slashing towards its head with a frightening edge. Once hit, you will be disabled if not dead. Lightning is not solid, and cannot fight like a normal blade. But the high-speed lightning itself carries the destructive power to destroy everything. This all-destroying power makes the lightning long sword sharper than an ordinary blade, and more dangerous. If you don't want to die, then get out of the way. The gorilla was worthy of its speed to slap Ron away. Seeing that the long knife was only a dozen centimeters away from its nose, it squatted down instantly to avoid the threat posed by the long knife. However, Ron's speed was not slow either. Although it avoided the beheading knife, a large piece of muscle from its forehead to the top of its head was cut off by the long knife. Ow! The gorilla screamed madly, blood gushed out, quickly dyeing the ground red. But it was worthy of the title of the Beast King. Even though its head was in unimaginable pain, it kept its eyes wide open and stared at Ron, not giving Ron any chance to sneak attack. However, what it didn't expect was that Ron didn't try to take advantage of the opportunity to launch a sneak attack. Instead, he let his hands hang naturally at his sides. With the inertia of his punches, he slowly landed on the top of a stubborn tree and shook his head. It's over. For 3 hours, I used all my strength in every move and style. After such a long battle, the gorilla's physical strength and reaction time obviously decreased. It was incredibly fast, powerful, and strong. At the beginning, I was able to fight with it. But as time went on, I only had to spend physical strength, while it had to endure the pain, losing blood, damaging internal organs, breaking bones, and having a concussion, and fighting with me who was completely uninjured. If the knife had been used at the beginning, the gorilla would never have dodged half of it, but the fact was that half of its face skin was torn off by itself, and it grimaced in pain. This proved that it had reached its limit, and death was only a matter of time. What's the point of dawdling with an increasingly weak opponent? If the fight continues, Ron won't get any training. Of course, if it was him half a month ago, the gorilla would not have suffered such a huge trauma, and his physical strength would not allow him to fight for a long time. Even if he would not be killed, he would be kicked away again. But with his breakthrough, 100 million volts was easy to use, and his physical strength was also improved qualitatively. When he still had 40% of his strength left, the giant ape had already reached the end of its rope. And Ron could use this 40% of his strength even more. Well, let this move send you off. As a sign of respect, I will name it after you. Ron raised his hand seriously, an arc of electricity flashed between his fingers, and the air was suddenly filled with an indescribable sense of danger. The gorilla didn't understand what Ron was saying, but it could see the murderous intent and pity in Ron's eyes. Suddenly, it roared wildly, got on all fours, and rushed straight towards Ron like crazy. As a powerful beast that has dominated this area for hundreds of years, the gorilla is different from ordinary beasts. It has its own self-esteem. The creature in front of it did not continue to attack while it was in unbearable pain. This is unreasonable in the world of beasts. What is that? Pitiful? No, it's a shame. It can be killed, but it will never allow itself to be pitied. Its footsteps were as heavy and powerful as thunder, and every step it took could squeeze the soil into a small hill. Looking at the gorilla getting closer and closer in front of him, Ron faded from the overload mode and let his right hand droop naturally. But the dissipation of lightning did not make the dangerous smell disappear, but became stronger. However, the gorilla's beast instinct seemed to be unable to smell the smell. It paused for 1 second 700 meters in front of Ron, gathered strength in its feet, and then stomped down hard. Boom! Crashed. The next moment, this huge beast flew up in a terrifying posture. It tilted its head slightly, clenched its fists, opened its bloody mouth and roared, twisting its body in mid-air, ready to attack, giving people an indescribable shock. The shock of pure power. This is it. Suddenly, Ron's eyes were filled with fanaticism, and he opened his mouth, revealing a mouthful of teeth that looked like white bones. Giant, brutal, and courageous. This is the ultimate power. The ultimate destruction. Suddenly, a huge force of thunder and lightning erupted from his body, raging in the air and forming a solid blue skeleton that was more than 100 meters high. Judging from the appearance alone, it looked a bit like the Uchiha clan's unique eye technique, Susanoo, and even the color was exactly the same as the chakra. However, it was not a complete form, and only the skeleton could be condensed. But considering the thunder fruit and the fact that this is not the world of Naruto, the true face of this form is obvious. It is the thunder god form that Enel once used. However, what Ron is doing now is somewhat different from Enel's. Whether it is Enel's thunder god form or Magellan's poison giant soldier, they both release all of their abilities, and then wrap all of this released power around themselves, thereby transforming into a huge posture with their respective characteristics. Ron used his unique overload technique to fill his body from the inside, bursting his original body and transforming into a giant. The difference is like Batman and Spider-Man, one relies on technology, without the equipment he is just a strong ordinary man, while the other is extremely poor and has no equipment, but can fight against superpowered criminals with his physique alone. It is a qualitative change both inside and outside. This change brought about from within, whether it is defense, attack, speed, or control over lightning, is more efficient and stable than the original Thor form. And most importantly, this form is even more violent. Literally, violent. Because Ron suddenly turned into a huge skeleton, the madness in the gorilla's eyes faded a little, but it did not hesitate, and still smashed its fist at Ron regardless. The fist was wrapped with air shells that were squeezed and concentrated to the extreme. Once it hit, a mountain would be destroyed. The desperate blow from the Beast King was so powerful that it shook the world. Just as his fist was about to hit the skeleton's fragile joints, Ron moved. Boom, crack. Ow! The gorilla screamed madly, covering his broken wrist and rolling around in agony. Just now, the skeleton without a trace of flesh and blood, with only blue arcs flashing, suddenly stretched out its palm and grabbed its fist at a terrifying speed. Then, the huge force in its body burst out, and before the gorilla was caught off guard, it pressed and pulled outwards, dissipated the impact inertia, and then rested on its knees. Then, another white bone hand pressed its wrist, and pressed down with both hands, breaking its arm abruptly. Watching the gorilla rolling on the ground in pain and turning into a white, blue skeleton giant, Ron dropped the broken limb in his hand and approached it step by step. In his palm, the raging lightning was forcibly condensed together, turning into a terrifying ball of light emitting an infinite aura of destruction. You are the opponent who gave me the last bit of inspiration. As a respect, I will name this move after you. At the same time, I will also use this move, to send you to death. 100 million volt Hell Ape. Chapter 71, The Beast Tide of Hell Island. Boom, boom. A loud explosion echoed throughout the entire Hell Island. A few minutes later, the ground began to shake. This time, not only did Dongt and others discover the vibration of Hell Island, but even the flying squirrels far away in the garrison felt the powerful force from the thunder and explosion. The ground was shaking and the garrison was in chaos. Countless mud and sand fell, knocking the warships all over the place. The flying squirrel frowned, suddenly drew his sword and rushed out, aiming at a huge rock falling from the sky. Laugh! The crescent blade flashed in an instant, but the boulder had already split into two pieces and fell into the sea water on both sides of the warship. The soldiers who had escaped by chance had no time to thank the flying squirrel. They were well trained and knew how critical the situation was. Without saying a word, they untied the anchor and started the warship. Woohoo! Soon, a group of people left the cave on a warship, and the flying squirrel and his friends only then saw clearly the turmoil happening on the island. What the hell is going on? Before my eyes, Hell Island was filled with chaos. The beasts that had been quiet before were howling wildly and fighting each other, making Hell Island noisy. A large group of mussel beetles rushed out of the wild forest and jumped into the sea like suicide, as if something was chasing them from behind, making them run for their lives. The three Jedi began to tremble with a trend that was almost visible to the naked eye. The beasts running and biting made the air filled with the stench of blood. The scene seemed like the end of the world. It's Ron. At this time, a naval colonel came over with his head covered in pain. He was fighting with the beast, and the chain reaction caused a beast tide. Flying squirrel. At this moment he felt very complicated. Why Ron? Why Ron again? It was Ron. With all these thoughts swirling in his mind, the flying squirrel took a breath and chose his words. What did he do? He caused a thunderstorm in the center of the basin, and the frightened beasts began to flee outward. The beasts on the periphery were driven out of their habitats and could only flee further out, driving away weaker creatures. This chain reaction formed a beast tide across the entire island. The colonel answered quickly, and suddenly half knelt on the ground with his head in his hands, blood oozing from his nose. The flying squirrel held him up and ordered, "Stop using your abilities and have a good rest." Yes. His ability is not very helpful in combat, but he can disperse his consciousness or spirit body in the sky regardless of obstacles and distance to monitor a designated area. However, this ability is not a universal peeping artifact. The spirit power of every creature in the designated area can interfere with him. The more active the interference, the stronger the interference. A powerful person can even shatter it with his own aura, such as the domineering color domineering. Watching the colonel leave with the help of the soldiers, the flying squirrel looked at Hell Island and felt a headache. He knew that as long as the monsters in the central basin began to panic, the Hell Island would inevitably fall into chaos. What he should consider now was how to save the group of new recruits trapped in the beast tide. Logically speaking, the monsters living in the center of Hell Island can see thunder every day when they look up. How could they start to flee for their lives just because of a thunderstorm? In fact, this is the misleading effect of inertial thinking. As mentioned above, the thunderstorm area, Tropical rainforest area, and icefield area are actually just 3 defense circles outside Hell Island, and do not represent the entire Hell Island. Therefore, the wild wolves and mussel beetles in the thunderstorm area are used to the thunder every day. No matter how loud and terrifying the thunder is, they can remain unmoved like a Buddhist player. Monsters in other areas are not used to thunder and lightning. In their eyes, every time thunder and lightning strikes, it is a disaster. The fear of thunder and lightning is deeply buried in their genes. The same is true for the wild beasts in the central basin of Hell Island, who live in primeval forests far away from thunderstorm areas. Although each of them is extremely powerful, their fear of lightning is no better than that of the people in the periphery. The sudden terrifying thunder and the Beast King's dying wail made them realize that this place was very dangerous, and they all chose to leave. In addition, it was the instinct of animals to seek benefits and avoid harm, so even if they didn't understand why, other creatures would follow suit and leave. But every piece of land in the dense forest has an owner. If they want to leave their own territory, they will naturally seize the territory of other creatures. As a result, the oppressed creatures will bully the weaker creatures, and the weaker creatures will continue to bully the weaker creatures, forming a butterfly effect, triggering a beast tide covering the entire Hell Island. Only the Beast Kings in the central area who were at the same level as the gorillas were not terrified, they just felt that Ron was not easy to provoke, and their instinct to seek benefits and avoid harm forced them to choose to move. However, they were not afraid because of their high IQ and strong strength, but other creatures did not know. The other creatures were already frightened by the lightning that was so close today, and when they saw the powerful Beast Kings starting to escape, they simply ran away without saying a word. As a veteran, the Flying Squirrel participated in the entire process of developing Hell Island, so he knew everything about this matter. Thunder fruit, ah! There has been no beast tide for all these years, not only because the recruits are not strong enough to go deep into the central basin where they could cause unrest, but also because they do not have a means to make all the beasts fear them. However, the thunder fruit is different. Even humans cannot eliminate the fear of thunder and lightning, let alone animals. It was almost inevitable that Ron would cause such a result by making a scene in the central basin. To be honest, it was the Flying Squirrel's fault for not thinking of this in advance. So he waved his hand and gave the order. Notify them and implement the emergency plan. What? The soldiers around who received the order were surprised and looked at the Flying Squirrel in disbelief. They were able to carry out this mission on the ship, so they naturally notified the process of the emergency plan. But the Flying Squirrel's adjutant came up and asked cautiously, Lieutenant General Flying Squirrel, do you really want to implement that plan? Hell Island has been developed for more than 10 years, and this emergency plan has been a decoration for more than 10 years. No one has ever really implemented it. If there were no exact data on this plan in the order, most soldiers would just treat it as a joke. Floods, earthquakes, and beast tides. Emergency plans are formulated for these 3 situations. The Flying Squirrel looked serious. He knew why the adjutant was so surprised, so he patiently explained, because these 3 situations mean that this monster is likely to wake up. Gulu. Recalling the description in the document, the adjutant swallowed hard and saluted, understood. Watching the adjutant run to the command room and clumsily begin to control the instruments according to the operating instructions, the Flying Squirrel looked back at Hell Island and suddenly felt a pain in his liver. Hiss! Ron! If that thing wakes up, I will never let you go. Call out, call out, call out! 3 purple flares with long tails appeared in the sky. The color looked like it was painted with a brush and could not be blown away by the wind. It could be said that unless one hid deep in the cave, one could see it from anywhere on Hell Island. After a tough battle, Donkt and his companions finally killed the giant bird and avenged their companions. Because they were at the top of the mountain with excellent visibility, they were the first group of recruits to discover the flare. Looking at the 3 purple tails, Donkt's pupil shrank. Command signal? What happened? There are several types of flares in the Navy. The three most commonly used are yellow, green, and red, which correspond to retreat, mission completion and request for support respectively. Purple flares are the least used ones, which represent the order for all troops to stay on the spot and wait for orders while ensuring their own safety, followed by a series of complex command signals to be sent out as a coordination. Dongt and his team also noticed the vibration just now, and they could guess what happened on the island. But what was puzzling was that if there was danger, why didn't they just fire a yellow flare to let everyone evacuate? At this moment, a companion ran in from outside, his body wet with cold sweat, his face terrified. "Oh no! It's a beast tide, a beast tide!" Dongt took a deep breath and his scalp felt numb. He finally understood why there was no yellow retreat signal. Because in the beast tide caused by the monsters of Hell Island, retreating is the most irrational thing to do. Chapter 72 The Follower appears. In the center of Hell Island, in the basin. In the chaos of beasts running around the island, the place where Ron was barely considered calm. The Beast Kings knew that Ron was not easy to mess with and stayed away quietly, but there was no chaos, making this place like the eye of the storm, still maintaining the order of the past. However, the beast tide outside was too large, and the vibrations it caused could be felt even here as the ground was shaking. What happened? Ron, the instigator, thought a little strangely, and then he saw 3 flares launched from the sky. Command signal. Looks like something big is happening. Ron looked serious. But I'm busy now. Sitting cross-legged on the ground, Ron tried to calm the thunder and lightning in his body and recover his strength. The move 100 million volts hellish violent ape that combines these 3 points is not a simple strengthening skill. The act of filling the body with electricity from the inside is powerful and the burden on the body is equally great. It only lasted for 3 minutes, and Ron had the illusion that his body was hollowed out. Although its sequelae are not as abnormal as extreme overload, it requires more physical support. There are pros and cons to both. If Ron doesn't take the time to recover his strength now, he won't be able to deal with the powerful enemy that is coming. Rustle. Suddenly, the chirping of insects and birds in my ears stopped and disappeared, and everything was silent. The air was as thick as mud, making it extremely difficult for him to raise his hands. Ron knew that this came from a strong sense of death crisis. The dangerous smell took over the control of his body, causing it to enter a state of stiffness, and the owner of this sense of crisis was about to show up. Boom! The next moment, a huge tail swept over from 100 meters away. The tall and thick tree trunks and hard sand and gravel did not bring the slightest obstruction, not even a sound. When the tail swept in front of Ron, a sonic boom burst out, and the strong wind destroyed everything in its path. Finally come! Suddenly, Ron's eyes lit up, and he teleported upwards, avoiding the tail by a hair's breadth. As its tail swept past, a strong wind spread out in a fan shape for several kilometers. In the strong wind, nothing could stop it, no matter what was in its way, leaving an ugly scar in the dense forest. Hiss, you're so strong! Looking at the destruction in front of him that became empty in an instant, Ron was a little shocked. The aftermath alone had such destructive power. The destructive power of the sneak attacker was many times more terrifying than that of the giant ape. Seeing that his tail missed Ron, the attacker shook his head and opened his mouth wide to bite him. Hiss! Only then did Ron see the true face of the attacker. It was a white snake that looked even larger than the giant ape. It is between 300 and 400 meters long, and its head is as big as a mountain. And because it is a snake, it has no head bones to limit it. When it opens its mouth, it forms a bag like a lake, which is extremely terrifying. And it takes advantage of the moment when it is in midair and cannot be avoided to launch an attack. Its grasp of timing is the pinnacle of beasts. But innocent. Teleport. Ron sneered and disappeared from the spot, then appeared on top of the giant snake, twisted his body and kicked it down. Overload lightning kick. Bang! Bang! The first kick was when he hit the giant snake's head, and the second kick was when the giant snake's head hit the ground. The giant snake wailed and couldn't move for a long time. Ron was relentless and took advantage of the moment when its head was suspended in the air due to the vibration and rebounded to come to its side, and used the same trick again, kicking it out. But at this moment, a strong wind blew. Nanny! I saw that the tail was retracted by the giant snake at some point, and it seized the opportunity to slap it directly. The sneak attack came at the moment when the old force was exhausted and the new force had not yet emerged. Even the Thunder Fruit ability user could not avoid it. Ron's eyes condensed and he took a deep breath. Iron block! Bang! When the snake's tail hit his body, Ron felt as if he was hit by a train. A terrifying force spread through his muscles and bones throughout his body, knocking him flying. Puff! With a mouth full of blood spurting out, Ron flew backwards at a speed of over 100 km per hour. At this speed, the water surface would turn into cement, enough to tear a person into pieces. He smashed countless tree trunks and hillsides along the way before finally embedding himself in a large rock and stopping after going more than 10 meters deep. Cough cough, hiss, it hurts. 3 ribs were broken, the ribs were severely displaced, and the right tibia was completely fractured. Feeling this familiar yet unfamiliar pain, Ron's eyes were full of surprise. Armament haki. No living creature's body has the ability to hit the physical body of a natural ability user, even the extremely lightning-resistant mussel beetle is no exception. Luffy has eaten the rubber fruit for several years, and the giant snake cannot have a rubber body. Therefore, the only thing that can hurt Ron is the armament haki and sea stone. After he finished speaking, he suddenly laughed at himself. That's right. What else could it be other than armament haki that could make me fall into a state of death fear and my body become rigid? But... wow! Ron's body was wrapped in electricity. He broke free from the stone and moved his limbs. With a numbing click sound, he squeezed the dislocated ribs back. If this is all you have, it's not enough to kill me. Boom! With one step, Ron broke through the hard stone and landed on top of the boulder. At this moment, spots of light appeared on his body, and he looked like a god. Threads of electricity were dancing in the air as if they had life, and a strong murderous aura burst out with the lightning. You want to kill me when I'm tired? Who gave you the confidence? Looking at the giant snake ready to attack in the distance, Ron's face was filled with fighting spirit. Killing the giant ape violently with the strongest attitude was, on the one hand, to pay tribute to it for giving him the last bit of inspiration, and on the other hand, it also consumed a lot of his physical strength and made him in a bad state. The fact that the stalker could hold back from attacking for so many days showed his vigilance. If he didn't give it a definite hope of killing himself, it might never make a move. This is a crazy idea, but it works. Seeing that Ron was obviously exhausted after killing the giant ape, the giant snake launched a sneak attack as expected. The only thing that Ron didn't expect was that he was just a beast, but he could actually use armament haki. This is a qualitative change. Without armament haki, even a giant ape would be worn down bit by him. But with armament haki, what Ron faced was not just a simple beast, but a strong one who could kill him. Life and death are just a matter of seconds. But... so what? This is why he came here. If no one can kill him, this survival experience is meaningless to him. Ron's healing ability is innate, but his madness is not. His madness is born for death, born for fighting, born for surpassing himself. He had only experienced the despair of lying on the hospital bed when he was critically ill. Even if he opened his eyes wide, it was pitch black all around him, and even if he tried his best, he couldn't move his fingers. Running, walking, singing, and playing games, which he didn't take seriously before, were just a luxury for him at that time. That kind of powerlessness and sadness, a kind of loneliness and coldness of sinking to the bottom of the sea and being abandoned by the world. He began to regret wasting his time. He didn't want to die like this. He wanted to experience the joy of being alive and regard the dregs that he had ignored before as treasures, but he was powerless. And then, he survived. Live towards death, live for death. That heart-wrenching experience made Ron a self-mutilating maniac, and also made Ron crazy. For Ron, the giant snake's ability to kill him was God's greatest kindness. Chapter 73 Lay vs Lay. As if angered by Ron's tone and expression, the giant snake roared, its huge body coiled and crushed the trees and rocks, and rushed towards him at a high speed. As two undisguised murderous auras emerged, all creatures in the jungle were in a panic, fearing that they would be affected. Boom! The giant snake swung its tail again and struck Ron head-on. Because of the size disparity, the snake's strongest move, strangulation, could not be used, but the snake's unique body structure allowed them to mobilize muscles that were several times stronger than creatures of the same weight. This tail was like a pillar of heaven collapsing, unstoppable. And after being prepared, Ron could clearly feel that there was a strong force wrapped around the giant snake's tail. It was not a force of potential energy. Although the tail did not turn black, it was undoubtedly the domineering power of armed color. Is this the prototype of armament haki like Toto? The prototype of armament haki is actually armament haki, not a second kind of power, but it is clearly different from the fully mastered armament haki, so it is listed separately and called the prototype. The biggest difference between the two is that the prototype only covers and cannot even wrap, let alone harden. If it's just a prototype. Ron was thoughtful, and before the snake's tail was about to hit him, he teleported away. Bang! With one swing of its tail, the ground cracked into deep gullies, and the power was extremely terrifying. Although it was just covering, the characteristic of the armed color domineering amplification of attack power would not change. Coupled with the giant snake's terrifying mass of muscle fibers, the explosive power was truly amazing. Then, Ron instantly appeared above the giant snake's head and punched it. 100 million volts, Thunder Dragon, Wild Bite. Roar. This was a move that Ron could only use after his breakthrough, and it reflected his practical advantage of not liking simple transformation attacks. Amidst the thunder, the dragon-shaped lightning opened its mouth and bit the giant snake, tearing its hard scales apart and spilling a large pool of purple blood. The blood was full of poison, and even the lifeless stones were stained with it, and were corroded by the purple color in an instant, becoming fragile. However, the Thunder Dragon relied on its own intangible characteristics as lightning to ignore the erosion of the poisonous blood, and with a flick of its tail, it wrapped itself into a ball, wrapped it around the giant snake's head, and launched a secondary attack on the wound. Zzz. Hiss. The 100 million volt Thunder Dragon was so huge that even a giant snake over 300 meters long could not ignore the damage it caused. It rolled over crazily in pain. Its swung tail destroyed everything around it, making it a daunting sight. Sure enough, even if your scales can withstand my lightning kicks, the cutting power of lightning can still be indestructible. However, the embryonic form of armament haki does not have a strong defensive ability. If you really compare it, it is not as good as a piece of iron. Ron discovered this when he kicked the giant snake on the head before. The giant snake can completely withstand the simple blunt attack with its scales and brutal muscle elasticity, and at most it will make it dizzy. On the contrary, the cutting ability of lightning can have a miraculous effect. You enjoyed beating me just now, didn't you? Now, it's my turn. Ron teleported to the giant snake's chin, shouted, and kicked vertically upwards. Pirate Chef Kick Technique Illegal Kick Navy version. Bang! With a thunderous vibration, the giant snake's mountain-like head slowly floated into the air. Ron was once again unyielding, wrapping his hands and feet around the high-speed lightning blades, streaking lightning in the air. While the giant snake was in a state of muscle paralysis due to the pain of the Thunder Dragon's attack, he left hundreds of scratches on its head. This was the first time that Ron had used all his strength outside of his sparring with Zifa. The combination of thunder's speed, explosive power, and penetrating characteristics created a completely overwhelming force. Suddenly, the sky changed color, dark clouds filled the sky, and the clouds in the sky were infected by the escaping lightning, turning into thunderclouds that flashed like silver snakes. Even though the giant snake broke free from the thunder dragon's restraints, it was hit by Ron's series of attacks and kept wailing, staggering, and falling backwards. "I'll kill you while you're sick." Seeing the giant snake leaning back, he condensed a long lightning sword and drew a long dragon of lightning. Then he mobilized all his muscles and chopped hard at the giant snake's eyes. Cut! Ding! SHH! At the critical moment, the giant snake suddenly raised its head back, and the lightning sword did not hit its eyes, but instead created a spark on the scales on its upper lip. Then it retreated in the face of the lightning's cutting properties, leaving a long trail of blood. Hard enough. Ron's pupils shrank as he looked at the giant snake's mouth with a big gap biting towards him, and lightning burst out around his body. 100 million volts, Chidori flow. This move was inspired by the Chidori style of the Najira, which combines offense and defense, so Ron copied the name. However, as the user of the Thunder Fruit, his control over lightning is much stronger than that of the Najira. Moreover, the Chidori style of the Najira releases Chidori through the whole body, lacking the destructive power of normal Chidori, but the Chidori style he created, each branch has the same piercing power as normal Chidori. Suddenly, the piercing chirping of birds made people feel annoyed. Lightning spikes extended from Ron's body, and the speed was extremely fast. The giant snake bit down, as if it had bitten a hedgehog. The lightning spikes pierced through the fragile oral cortex and then got stuck inside the scales. Some lightning spikes just pierced into the weak points and passed through the gaps in its scales. From the outside, it looks like a giant snake with a thorny mouth. The pain caused by this move made the giant snake crazy, and it swung its head back and forth and hit the ground, trying to get Ron stuck in its mouth out. However, the next moment it suddenly stopped moving, and dazzling lightning flashed on its scales. It sensed Ron's location, and took the opportunity to crawl towards its head through the tender flesh in its mouth. Once it was attacked by Ron and its brain was crushed, the end would be self-evident. Thinking of that scene, a trace of fear flashed in the giant snake's eyes, and the depths of his throat suddenly lit up. Tsitsizi! Nanny! This familiar smell is thunder and lightning. Bang! Ron was already in the giant snake's mouth, and he couldn't find a place to dodge. In just a moment, a beam of lightning shot out from the giant snake's throat. The powerful electricity that hit him was even more terrifying than the natural lightning he encountered in the wild forest. With a blinding white light, Ron flew out and smashed into the ground, creating a spider web-like pit. Then, a continuous stream of huge lightning pillars instantly turned everything around into dust, pushing Ron deeper into the center of the earth. Damn it! I can't move. External lightning could not hurt him, after all, he was lightning. But Ron's lightning was completely out of his league in front of the giant snake, just like the water in a stream being carried downstream by the water in a river, making him unable to move. Still vomiting? How many thunderbolts do you have? Ron complained speechlessly. He didn't expect the giant snake to spit thunder, just like he didn't expect the other party to master the armed color domineering. Accidents in battle are inevitable, this is common sense. He learned a lot from Zephyron, and it didn't affect his fighting spirit. But the amount of fluid the giant snake spits out is quite astonishing. Even if the amount was insufficient, the lightning that could immobilize him now was at least 200 million volts. Such a huge explosion was something he couldn't afford even now. But the giant snake not only did it, but it also lasted for a full 5 seconds without stopping. This reserve of lightning was simply incredible. I must have eaten a fake thunder fruit. But at this moment, Ron understood why there was a 1,000-meter-long white snake lying on the top of the dangerous mountain on the day of landing. Not to mention looking for food, there was thunder and lightning raging there, and even mussel beetles couldn't survive. But if the white snake race has a special ability to swallow and spit out natural thunder and lightning, it is not surprising that it appeared there. It was probably trying to absorb lightning to replenish its ammunition, but it didn't expect that the sudden appearance of a transparent white lightning column exceeded its endurance limit and directly split it into pieces. If that's the case, we must stop the simple discharge attack to avoid helping the enemy. As he was thinking, Ron suddenly found that the lightning column on his body had weakened by half a point, and he immediately perked up. He knew that the giant snake's lightning was almost exhausted. This move was hidden so deeply by it, if he was not about to rush in and destroy its brain, it would probably not be used. It can be seen that it is a bottom-line move. Once the thunder and lightning are emitted, it will be the clarion call for his counterattack. But at this moment, a high-speed rotating snake head fell from the sky and crashed straight into the channel created by the lightning column. The giant snake approached while continuously ejecting lightning, and then used its head as a bullet to shoot at Ron. This smash even brought with it the domineering aura of armed color. Apparently the giant snake also understood that the creature in front of it was not so easy to kill. It did not give Ron a chance to breathe and tried to knock him to death with a barrage of punches. Boom, boom. Finally I'm home, thanks to my book friend Heroes of Might and Magic Ziobai for becoming the first helmsman of this book. Thank you for your support. I would also like to thank all the book friends for their rewards, but I cannot list them all due to the limited word count. Without further ado, today is the third update. This is the real deal. Chapter 74, The Terrifying Beast. The reason why bullets of firearms, the iconic representative of thermal weapons, have such powerful lethality, in addition to the explosive impact brought by the gunpowder filled inside, the biggest reason is that the barrel can provide enough kinetic energy for the bullet, giving the warhead extremely powerful lethality. The same was true for the giant snake's collision. The channel created by the lightning column was the gun barrel, its head was the bullet, and its brute muscle strength was the gunpowder. Boom, boom. As the giant snake's head hammer fell to the ground, a terrible vibration occurred. The soil deep underground suddenly rushed outward like a waterfall, tearing the earth apart. The entire Hell Island was trembling and wailing, and the undulating soil was like soft cotton, making it difficult to stand. In just a moment, a canyon appeared in the central basin of Hell Island. The hard stone was fragile in front of the giant snake's hateful blow, and deep ravines were cracked. The scorching heat crystallized the soil and the rolling magma exploded continuously. At the bottom of the canyon, in the smoke and dust, the giant snake pulled its head out of the soil. Its body was covered with scarlet cracks and scars, and the crack on its lips was torn by the vibration, revealing its pink gums. It looked disheveled and covered in dust. But even so, its eyes were still cold. Wild, domineering, bloodthirsty, ruthless, and unstoppable, this is the majesty of the King of Hell Island. Hiss! The giant snake roared to the sky, venting its excitement for yet another victory. Its roar, which was not loud at all, made the entire forest and all things fall silent. No matter whether it is seriously injured or not, it is always the master on this island and all things will submit to it. After the roar ended, the giant snake slowly lowered its cold gaze. An indescribable hunger filled its brain, causing it to open its mouth and swallow the large piece of soil where Ron was. Then, the giant snake shuddered as if it had an electric shock, and a strong sense of sleepiness came over it, making it too lazy to crawl to the ground, and it coiled up and fell asleep on the spot. Hell Island, this huge behemoth that was developed by the Navy for more than 10 years before it was officially put into use, finally revealed its true face in front of the soldiers today. Valve number 1 is open. Valve number 2 is open. All valves are ready, power source is sufficient, waiting for orders. The Navy did not let this warship shuttle back and forth between the dangerous Hell Island and the Navy headquarters for 10 years in the spirit of thriftiness. Instead, the warship had to serve before the equipment was completely scrapped because only this warship had a set of instruments to control the island's safety devices. The reason is still because of Durag's betrayal. As the son of the Navy hero Garp, Drago was almost trained as a designated admiral of the Navy, and countless people were optimistic about his future. He was also very motivated, showing his extraordinariness since he was a child. He was smart and capable, strong but not arrogant. With the help of his father, he quickly became famous in the Navy and became a vice admiral in his early 20s, and was deeply trusted by the warring states. But he betrayed. In terms of strength, the departure of a top-level reserve soldier would not cause any serious damage to the Marine headquarters, but when Drago betrayed, his military rank was too high, and his status was close to Garp, and he belonged to the real core of the Navy. As a result, his departure caused the huge Marine headquarters to have almost no secrets in the eyes of the Revolutionary Army, and the intelligence leakage was quite serious. The Navy and the world government failed in their attempts to encircle and suppress the Revolutionary Army many times, and the leaked information played a big role in this. So the warring states arranged a series of mobilization reforms to try to prevent themselves from leaking more intelligence. Even if there is, it must be outdated. One of them is to destroy the remaining control instruments of the Hell Island safety device and leave only one set. Lieutenant General Flying Squirrel, everything is ready. The adjutant trembled slightly and came in front of the Flying Squirrel. As the adjutant of the Flying Squirrel, he was a veteran who had seen many exaggerated scenes, but this set of safety devices, even in his experience, was worthy of a stunning feat. Absorbing the lightning emitted by the monster itself as a power source to support the operation of the machine, and fusing the mixture of highly toxic corpses left by the poisonous creatures on the island into a tranquilizer through a filter. Such a fantastic idea really opened his eyes. Well, let's get started. The Flying Squirrel calmed his breathing and gave instructions calmly. Yes. The adjutant shouted excitedly, then turned around and yelled at the Den Den Mushi, count down 10 seconds, 10, 9, 8, 3, 2, 1. Start. Buzz. As the last countdown sounded, a vibration spread out from the warship. The sea surface was sparkling, waves were splashing, and large schools of fish emerged from the water, as if some creatures on the seabed were about to wake up and they were scrambling to escape. Waiting for the vibration to spread far away, the surroundings suddenly became quiet. Even the wild beasts that were panicking in the beast tide suddenly paused for a moment. Just when many people thought that the startup had failed, a stronger vibration appeared. This time the focus is not on the warship, but the entire Hell Island. Bang! Crash! Suddenly, a black iron pillar with a diameter of hundreds of meters suddenly emerged from the bottom of the water, and the splashes of water covered the sky. Then, as if a switch was turned on, 1,000-meter iron pillar after another emerged from the sea water, surrounding Hell Island, forming a steel prison. Looking down from the sky, it looks like a huge prison cell carved on the blue sea. Use the sky as your blanket and the ground as your mat. The cell alone is so huge, where are the prisoners inside? Gulu. Some sailors swallowed hard, looking at the Hell Island locked in a prison cell, their clothes soaked with cold sweat. No. It can't be right. It turned out that they were right, these steel cylinders were indeed a prison cell. And the prisoners inside are indeed Hell Island. Of course, one word should be added here, Hell Island crab. The entire Hell Island, which is as large as a medium-sized island, is actually a living Hell Island crab. It is the largest creature ever recorded by humans, bar none. As the soldiers watched in horror, suddenly, a huge shadow rose from the bottom of the sea. Its huge size squeezed the sea water, and it rolled up thousands of waves, reaching hundreds of meters high. Are you really going to wake up soon? The Flying Squirrel's face was as gloomy as water at this moment. He knew how terrifying the monster in front of him was. Although this move was similar to the unconscious turning over before waking up, it was definitely not something that human power could resist. But since it has been transformed into a training ground for our new recruits, there is no way we can let it run wild. The Flying Squirrel snorted coldly, and his immense momentum spread out, awakening the numb soldiers, and ordered, "Activate attack sequences 1 to 3. Yes." The soldier with stiff hands and feet shuddered when he heard this, shouted loudly, and quickly pressed the buttons on the operating table. Then, the steel pillars that covered the entire Hell Island suddenly lit up. Each steel pillar was wrapped with a terrifying electric current, emitting a dazzling light like a light bulb. The sun in the sky was also eclipsed by this light, and the sea was dyed the unique color of thunder. Some Navy officers screamed and covered their bleeding eyes. At the same time, an enormous electric current and surge roared out, and the buzzing vibrations that spread in the air made people feel so uncomfortable that they almost vomited blood. Even the flying squirrel couldn't help but groan and took a small step back. The aftermath alone produced such a terrifying noise, and the wave that was attacking from the front had no time to show off its power before it was dispersed by the surge and lightning. There was a cry of pain from under the sea. The terrible noise caused countless fish and shrimps to float to the surface with their bellies up. Most of the soldiers on the warship were bleeding from all 7 orifices. They felt a tightness in their chest and shortness of breath, and fell to the ground with a thud as their eyes went black. Too scary. Is this really a monster that humans can defeat? The flying squirrel adjutant struggled to stand up and looked at the huge shadow in front of him, his eyes full of fear. In the world of One Piece, humans have never been the masters. Humans are just the largest group of people living on the surface of the Earth's crust. Compared with the entire majestic planet, the behemoths hidden in the deep sea are the top overlords on the planet. When the strong light faded, the soldiers who were still awake finally saw what the huge shadow that caused the waves was. It was a claw, an ordinary crab claw. An ordinary crab claw that is big enough to survive on as a piece of land. Countless marine creatures built nests on it, leaving mottled traces. A sea king with a body size of more than 1,000 meters was probably hit by an unexpected disaster. Facing the electric shock surge and the beating, it was caught in the airflow formed by the two and was ground into a pulp. The scarlet bloodstains it left behind were just the edges and corners of the claws. Just like a tiny scar on the palm of an ordinary person. Chapter 75, Survival in the Snake's Belly, Part. It was not just the surge of electricity that stopped the huge claws that looked like land. At the moment when the steel column emitted strong light, the currents passed through the steel column that penetrated deeply into the brain of the Hell Island crab and released voltage, interfering with its movements. At the same time, the machinery buried deep inside the carapace began to operate, injecting the highly toxic mixture collected from the island into the body of the Hell Island crab, making it completely unable to take advantage of its size. OM. The unique howling sound echoed in the vast sea. The Hell Island crab rarely woke up, and the continuous attacks made it drowsy. On the sea, the warship rose and sank with the waves. Under the tense gaze of the soldiers, the huge claws that stood stiff in the air, like the collapse of the sky, finally lost their strength and drooped down weakly. Boom! Wow! Is the knot over? I don't know. Vice Admiral Flying Squirrel. The soldiers cast their hopeful eyes towards the flying squirrel, who stood with his sword drawn. After sensing for a moment with his observation haki, he sheathed his sword and said, "It's over. Fortunately, we are here, otherwise it would have really escaped." Upon hearing the news, the soldiers were immediately excited. Some even said shamelessly that the battle was too easy. Did you win? Is it that simple? Yeah. I thought there would be a big battle, but I didn't expect it would just take a few switches. In response, the flying squirrel fixed his eyes on the careless soldiers. The latter felt the sharp gaze like a needle, and lowered their heads one by one, not daring to speak loudly. After a pause, the flying squirrel slowly spoke, "Today's victory was won by your predecessors who shed blood, sweat, and sacrificed their lives for you more than a decade ago. You just won a trivial victory by stepping on the corpses of your predecessors. What is there to be happy about? The flying squirrel has witnessed with his own eyes the killing spree of the Hell Island crab. The islands that have been eaten beyond recognition and the devastated land are even more exaggerated than any monster in a disaster story. In order to stop it, the Navy sent 2 admirals who were seriously injured, almost all the lieutenant generals died, and only 17,000 of the 30,000 elite soldiers died. It took such a huge sacrifice to finally stop the atrocities of the Hell Island crab. And by human standards, the monster in front of you is nothing more than a baby. The flying squirrel calmly uttered a piece of news that terrified everyone. According to the world government's investigation, there are a total of 7,000 islands in the South China Sea, including large islands. The DNA of the Hell Island crab was detected deep in the soil. In other words, if left alone, this monster can grow to an individual that is as big as an area of sea. An individual is an ocean. Monsters of this level are truly beyond ordinary people's imagination. Then, why not kill it? A soldier asked doubtfully. In response, the flying squirrel was silent for a moment, then shook his head and said, "We have killed it 3 times. The island in front of you was built on its corpse. But as you can see, it can be resurrected and grow again. Although Vegapunk speculates that it has a core and will not revive if the core is destroyed, no one has found its core so far. The reason why the survival training was chosen here is also for the reason that we come here to monitor it from time to time." Gilu. All the soldiers fell silent, looked up tremblingly, and looked at the Hell Island in front of them. It turns out that it's not that they don't want to kill, but that they simply can't kill. Hell Island is so terrifying. At this moment, a strong tremor suddenly came from the center of the island. The fierce power of an earthquake rolled up thousands of waves and pushed the warship several kilometers away. The island was in chaos, and all the beasts were running wild. The flying squirrel managed to stand firm in the shaking and looked at Hell Island. What happened again? Flying Squirrel. Lieutenant General Flying Squirrel. The adjutant called out in a voice that was about to cry, and then pointed to the sea. "Quick, look at that." The flying squirrel felt a chill in his heart and quickly turned his head to look. Under the dim sea, there was a huge eyeball that could not be described in words, emitting a cold light, staring at their warship. The huge body of the war beast might not even be as big as the eyelashes of this eyeball. Of course, if crabs also had eyelashes. The Hell Island crab was completely awakened by the shock just now. Time went back to half an hour ago. In a dark and stuffy space, Ron woke up from the turbidity. "Where is this? Hiss, it hurts." He tried to lower his head and looked at his broken body. A strange smile appeared on his face. "Hee, ha ha ha, ha 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 ha." The smile quickly turned from a low laugh to a wild laugh, and Ron almost cried with laughter. Although he had no strength in his body, Ron knew that he was not dead. "As long as you are not dead, that is enough." I see, I see. Is this your most powerful attack? Or, it can't kill me. Ha 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 ha." When the giant snake smashed its head down like a bullet, Ron had seen his own death. The acceleration of his mind that could not be broken until he died was activated, showing how critical the situation was. However, even so, in the face of absolute power, all his counterattacks seemed pale and powerless. When he was trying to mobilize lightning to teleport, the giant snake's head had already hit him. Then he passed out. Even thought he was dead. But now it seems that even the giant snake's hateful attack still couldn't kill him. Is this stomach acid? Did it eat me? Suddenly, the stinging pain in his body attracted Ron's attention. With the help of the blue electric light flowing like blood in the giant snake's body, Ron found himself in a large pool of corrosive solution. The corrosive acid unique to the giant beast's stomach was fighting with his body's self-healing ability, causing him to be unable to control his body even if he woke up. "But it's just that I can't control my body. He is the user of the thunder fruit, and unless he dies, his body will always maintain the elemental properties of the Thunder Man. As long as the acid begins to corrode his body, the Thunder Man's passive properties will be activated, making the acid ineffective. They are unable to move now, mainly because the comminuted fractures caused by the previous severe injuries have not healed. The self-healing ability is a passive skill, and they have a hot temper. In the acid, before the elemental passive skill is activated, they run to fight against the stomach acid that corrodes the body, resulting in no time to repair the broken bones. Seeing this scene, Ron's mouth twitched. For the first time in his life, he realized that his self-healing ability could also be a problem. The return of life must be put on the agenda. Instead of doing the right things, he rushes to do things that he shouldn't do. Lying quietly in the stomach acid, Ron closed his eyes and began to check his body. Are the head and left wrist the only parts that can move? That's enough. Swish! The next moment, Ron grabbed the wrinkled tender flesh of the giant snake's stomach wall with his left hand, and used his wrist to throw himself out. Once he was out of the range of stomach acid, his self-healing ability was instantly released, and when he fell from mid-air, the command of his feet had been restored. Pat! With his clean feet stepping on the flesh wall in the giant snake's belly, Ron bent his spine, then straightened his back little by little, adapting to the healing body. The broken bones moved back to their positions as if they were upside down, and the cracks disappeared almost instantly. A large number of muscle sprouts woven like silk, and muscles recovered quickly. Ron touched his handsome face that had just exposed his gums. Now it has recovered almost completely, but the regeneration speed of skin is far slower than that of muscles and bones. What is this? Thicker skin. Is it possible that I'm not really human? Even though Ron had been with it for 20 years, he was still dumbfounded by this terrifying self-healing ability that could bring back the dead to life. Goo! Suddenly, a muffled thunder echoed in the dark belly of the giant snake. Ron touched his abdomen, which was almost cramping, and took a breath of cold air. I must replenish my food immediately. Once my self-healing ability is activated, it will not stop. If I don't have enough energy, I will digest myself. After saying that, he laughed. Such a big snake, there's no way it's enough to eat. Looking up at the muscles around him that were glowing with lightning, Ron could only feel drool flowing from the corners of his mouth. At this time, the flying squirrels outside were suppressing the Hell Island crab and injecting the highly toxic mixture into its body. Of course, Ron, who was deep inside the snake's belly, had no idea what was happening outside. The terrible autophagic nature of his self-healing ability forced him to feast on the giant snake's belly. Tear! A piece of meat was torn off by him. Zzz. The meat was cooked very quickly. Creak! Chicken flavor, crunchy. The giant snake was in agony from the cramps in its abdomen, and it kept rolling on the ground. At the same time, it used its belly to hit the mountain, trying to kill Ron in its belly in this self-mutilation way. However, without the armed color domineering, Ron could remain unharmed despite its infinite strength. After all the tossing and turning, Ron was fine, and instead, he replenished his physical strength bit by eating its blood. The giant snake was now limp in the sinkhole it had created, and its eyes were full of despair. As a snake, is it wrong for me to eat my prey alive? Why did I eat such an evil star? Hiccup, I'm full. Soon, Ron burped, and a foul smell of snake blood came out of his stomach and flowed into his mouth. He took a breath, and the pungent and fishy smell almost made him vomit. He suddenly felt that the snake meat in front of him was difficult to swallow. Forget it, that's enough. It's time to send you on your way. Throwing away the snake meat, Ron turned on the lightning to identify the direction. If I left the stomach in the direction of the snake's head, then this side leads directly to the heart. After being tormented in his stomach, the giant snake's fighting power was reduced to 1/10 of what it was. The internal bleeding was only getting worse like a domino effect, and there was almost no cure in the wild. If it didn't have this self-healing ability, the giant snake's death would only be a matter of time. Just like the reason why he killed the giant ape, there is no point in wasting time with an opponent who cannot kill him and is only getting weaker and weaker. Following the snake path, Ron soon found his target in a pool of plasma with strong electric current. The heart of the giant snake. But unlike what he guessed, the heart of the giant snake was a little strange. In addition to its appearance like a blue glass ball, there was also a knife stuck in it. It's really inserted. Except for the handle which is still outside, the rest of the knife is inserted completely in. At the same time, Ron also found a rotten and unrecognizable body under the beating blue heart, a human body. Chapter 76 The Relics of the Thunder Swordsman. Later comer, no matter who you are, if you can leave alive, please take my sword with you, Thunder Swordsman, Hughes Moore. After searching through the smelly rotten meat, Ron only found this last will sealed in an iron barrel, written with blood as ink and bone as pen. The handwriting was very sloppy, with intermittent strokes, which showed the writer's state at the time. Therefore, Ron had to guess and finally recognize all the words. Thunder Swordsman, Hughes Moore. Ron carefully recalled the comics he had read and confirmed that there was no information about this person. However, he was able to go deep into the snake's belly and almost kill the giant snake. Even if he was weak, he was enough to gain a foothold in the new world. So the sword left by such a strong man. Ron looked up and stared silently. He found the source of the giant snake's ability to spit thunder. After all, the heart whose blood was almost turning into blue plasma looked so unique. Even Ron at this time did not dare to underestimate the thunder power contained in it. It was accumulated with the help of its huge body, and the qualitative change caused by the quantitative change. The giant snake drew electricity from its heart, and then, through a series of transformations that he couldn't understand, spewed lightning out through its mouth. Perhaps this is why the giant snake has never used venom even though its blood is extremely poisonous. In order to spit lightning, its venom sacs and even venom ducts have to compromise to adapt to the lightning, and under the high temperature of lightning, any toxin will lose its activity. The source of this lightning power is the unknown magic weapon that has penetrated into the heart. The hilt of the sword is purple and black, and it is definitely not made of metal or any other material. Because it is not something that ordinary materials can do to remain immortal under the high temperature of lightning for a long time. In the center of the sword is a gem that keeps flashing with lightning. Every time the heart beats and contracts, a stream of lightning like a small snake spreads out from the gem and rushes into the heart along the sword. Then, as the heart beats and squeezes, the current spreads throughout the body along the blood vessels. The giant snake's body seemed to have adapted to the intensity of the electric current after a long period of running in. This lightning, which was powerful enough to destroy the activity of cells of carbon-based life forms, not only did not burn the blood vessels, but instead filled every cell it passed through with electric current. However, although it seems that the two have formed a strange balance, as the user of the thunder fruit, Ron can conclude that if it were just like this, the giant snake would definitely not be alive today. No matter how strong the resistance of normal life forms to lightning is, it cannot rewrite the common characteristics of carbon-based life forms. The fragile cell tissues can withstand it for a while but not for a lifetime. Under the repeated burning of lightning, they will only slowly collapse. The carbohydrates will be completely oxidized and decomposed, and the water will all evaporate, leaving only a small amount of minerals, which will then be carbonized, commonly known as a charred corpse. Although the thunder power emanating from the gem was rare for the giant snake's huge body, it still could not withstand the accumulation of power over the years. So, this is why you climbed up the mountain to get struck by lightning. In order to avoid being roasted to death by the increasing lightning in its heart, the giant snake had few options. First, it could force itself to evolve over tens of millions of years, adapt to the flow of lightning, and spray out the excess lightning stored in its body. It seemed to have done it, although it paid the price of being a venomous snake that could not spray venom. Second, it uses external lightning to guide the remaining electricity in its body into the earth. Before the current is strong enough to burn it to death, its strong body perfectly limits the leakage of current, and only when external lightning strikes can the electricity be pushed out of its body. From this scene, Ron understood two things. First, it is not that the giant snake race has the ability to swallow and spit out lightning, but the unknown longsword in its heart forces it to learn this ability. Secondly, the giant snake race he had been looking for did not exist at all. The 1,000-meter-long white snake that was struck off the cliff and dismembered by wild beasts was the smaller white snake in front of him. As for the reason why the giant snake was not dead, Ron pondered silently and muttered to himself. Sure enough, this is the principle of snake shedding its skin. By shedding the old dead body, then reforging another body from the corpse and crawling out. This is unscientific on Earth, but in the world of One Piece, hee. If the giant snake could talk, Ron would ask it, "Do you know Orochimaru?" Tisk, forget it. The giant snake's footsteps can be put aside, the focus now is the sharp blade in front of us. Just by looking at the hilt that could remain brand new in the thunder, Ron could conclude that even if this sword was not one of the supreme swords, it must be a magical weapon that was not inferior to the supreme sword. In addition, the mysterious gem that could release thunder was priceless. Hughes more, right? I agree to your request. Grabbing the hilt with one hand, an electric current bounced back, causing Ron to shudder. Feeling the numbness in his palm, Ron smiled happily, great. I just happen to be short of a weapon. Even if you don't tell me, I will take it away. As if in response to Ron, Hughes Moore's head, which had long been rotten and unrecognizable, suddenly fell to the ground and rolled around. Laugh. Boom. When the long sword was pulled out, what spurted out was not blood, but thunder. Outside, the giant snake suddenly widened its eyes because the pain in its body had eased. It felt that something in its heart had been pulled out. Although this would prevent it from actively seeking lightning strikes to relieve its pain, the moment its heart was broken, it would also kill its life force. In this case, it would be better not to pull it out. This is a scam. Hiss. Its life force was cut off, and its biological instinct made it struggle madly. Bang, bang, boom. The giant snake's eyes were filled with despair, and the intense pain made it keep hitting its head against the ground in an attempt to relieve the pain. When faced with pain and scars, primates would cover their wounds with their hands, and big cats would lie down and lick them with their tongues, but snakes without hands and feet could only do this when they were in pain, twisting their bodies like they were breakdancing. When all the creatures on Hell Island went crazy because of the strong sense of oppression emitted by the Hell Island crab that was about to wake up, the giant snake was like a hard-working excavator master, constantly digging the ground. At last, the surface soil on the back of the Hell Island crab was dug through by it, revealing the ground underneath, which was forged from steel. The giant snake's head smashed through the thick steel coating and fell into a toxic molten pool that exuded a foul smell. These highly toxic mixtures are prepared for the Hell Island crabs. They can only serve as sedatives for the Hell Island crabs, but for a little snake like it, they are no different from magma and it is simply unable to resist. Hiss! With a shrill scream, the giant snake twisted wildly in the venom pool, and the flesh and blood on its body melted away at a speed visible to the naked eye. The scene was extremely terrifying. The strong muscles and scales could not protect it at this time. It struggled in vain for a few times, and then the blood melted away, revealing Ron, who was hiding in its body with a confused face. Fuck! Do you want to drag me down with you? Without time to think, the deterrent power brought by the poisonous liquid made Ron shudder. Ron didn't want to touch the breath of death that would kill anyone who touched it. While the venom had not completely melted the giant snake, Ron plunged his head into the blue heart of the giant snake, pulled it off and put it on his body. Then he exerted force with his legs, stomped on the ground continuously, and instantly stepped out a crack and pit in the muscle tissue of the giant snake. Navy 6 styles, shave. But the giant snake's strong muscle tissue was like soft dough, crushed by his foot. The venom from the outside softened and dissolved all the muscles in just a few seconds, and the foul-smelling corrosive and toxic solution below quickly surged up, melting everything in its path. Ron, who was standing on empty air and without any force, was unable to reach his maximum speed. He didn't know how deep this poisonous lake was, and whether this force was enough. But at this moment, he had no choice but to do his best. As expected, the giant snake's strong heart melted very quickly in the surrounding solution like butter meeting a hot knife. It flew only a dozen meters before being completely corroded by the terrible poison. Ron's heart twitched when he saw this, and without thinking, he set up his own electromagnetic barrier. Hum! With a buzzing sound, the venom was temporarily repelled. But even so, the venom still persisted and tried to penetrate the barrier. Ron had to reduce the range of the barrier and increase the defense strength to barely compete with the venom. Finally, the view ahead became bright, and Ron, despite the electromagnetic barrier, turned into a ball of lightning and rushed out. Pfft! Wow! Oh, I'm scared to death. Standing on the ground again, Ron released a thunderbolt to shake off the remaining venom on the barrier, leaning on his knees and breathing heavily. He didn't expect that just drawing the sword would bring him a life-and-death crisis. As an elemental being, he is not afraid of corrosion, but as a human he is afraid of poison. Although his self-healing ability can decompose toxins, the upper limit is not high. A mere thunder mosquito cub can cause him to have diarrhea. This venom is obviously not of the same level, and Ron dare not test it. Chapter 77 Underground Factory. After finally catching his breath, Ron stood up and looked around at the steel factory that clearly did not fall into the definition of a deserted island. Where is this? Everything in front of him told Ron that this was a man-made building. The surrounding walls were made of steel, and rows of water tower-like pools were lined up along the walls. Inside, there were corpses emitting a foul odor, and there was a collapsible net below, from which drops of corrosive liquid seeped and dripped, flowing down along the grooves and merging into the highly toxic molten pool he had just fallen into. In the center of the factory was a pool filled with highly toxic liquid, hundreds of meters long and wide, and buried deep underground, and no one knew how deep it was. Several thick transparent glass tubes extended from the side of the molten pool, and with the help of steel components, they turned in midair and inserted into the ground, and no one knew where they would eventually lead to. If the molten pool didn't contain a highly toxic solution, Ron would have thought it was a water plant just by looking at the appearance. Where will so much venom be transported to? Could it be that the Navy is conducting biological weapons experiments? A gleam of light flashed in Ron's eyes, and he found that he seemed to have found the core secret of Hell Island. You can't blame me for this. It's your own fault for not taking proper security measures, allowing a snake to get in. However, he did not think about it. In order to kill with one strike, the giant snake used a rocket head hammer to carve a canyon in the basin, stirring up tons of mud and sand. And just now, in the frenzy of near death, it repeatedly hit the ground with its head. If it did not have ulterior motives, no human or beast could dig the steel shell deep in the soil, let alone break in here. Squeak, squeak. At this moment, a sound of air leakage attracted Ron's attention. He looked down and saw a white skeletal snake head with a cracked upper lip stuck in the middle of the glass pipe. The surrounding venom was pushing the skull into the pipe under high pressure, but it failed to crush the snake head. Instead, it overwhelmed the glass pipe and a nail nailed to the component was pushed out. The venom in the pool did not remain static, but was being transported to the pipe. At the same time, several instruments in the corner of the factory kept flashing and humming, and the smell of burning soon filled the air. Okay. Ron turned around and looked at the water towers around him that were soaked with corpses and various impurities, then he lay down and glanced at the molten pool that had nothing but green water-like liquid and even no sticky substances. Suddenly, he had an ominous premonition. Masaka. As soon as he finished speaking, the pipe holding the giant snake's head exploded. At the same time, the highly toxic liquid that was suddenly released by the high pressure rushed to the broken pipe. The result was continuous explosions. Boom, boom. Fug. Looking at the poisonous liquid flying in front of him accompanied by flames, Ron didn't have time to think about it. He dragged his trophy sword and flew upwards without saying a word. At the same time, because the supply of sedatives was interrupted, the sleepy Hell Island crab opened its eyes and stared at the naval warship above its head that impressed it. Roar! Outside Hell Island, there was chaos on the warship. Lieutenant General. The venom delivery system is not responding. All instruments are inoperative. What? Let's check again. The equipment is buried deep underground. It's impossible for all of it to fail in an instant. Did someone plant a bomb in there? Ron, the bomb wasn't dropped, but the effect was pretty much the same. Ordinary impurities can be easily removed from glass pipes without causing blockage, let alone causing the equipment to explode. But if a giant snake corpse over 300 meters long blocked the pipe, the consequences would be quite serious. It's true. Currently only the thundercloud system is still functioning. Flying squirrel. Lieutenant General? What should we do? The adjutant was about to cry. Didn't we agree that it was over? Why did you wake up again? How to fight this monster that is beyond human control? Their last resort to fight against the Hell Island crabs is the safety device left on the island. Now that the venom delivery system has failed, it is equivalent to losing an arm. Increase the current. Activate attack sequence number 4. The awakening of the Hell Island crab was something the flying squirrel had never expected. The sleeping giant and the awakened giant were two completely different creatures. A faint breath of oppression lingered in the air. This pressure, similar to the domineering color of the overlord, made people's mouths dry. In addition, the venom system failed, and the soldiers on the warship fell into panic again. The flying squirrel rubbed his temples with a headache, suppressed his inner tension, and waved his hand to give orders. Failure of the safety device at this time can be quite fatal. Without the highly toxic mixture, even if the electric current could reach its brain and interfere with its movements, the damage caused by the huge body of the Hell Island crab when it struggled would not be affected at all. But the flying squirrel knew that the more critical the situation was, the more he couldn't show any fear. He was the sky of this warship. If even he started to get scared, the soldiers would be immediately dominated by fear. Under the influence of the powerful momentum of the flying squirrel, the soldiers who barely stayed awake entered the instructions according to the operation manual. The steel pillars flashing with lightning around the Hell Island crab burst into a buzzing sound in the next moment, and circles of waves suddenly spread out. At the same time, an indescribable numbness began to spread, as if in the sky covered by thunder and lightning, making people's hands and feet numb. Roar! After launching the fourth attack sequence, the Hell Island crab let out a clearly audible wail. The steel pillars inserted into its brain burst out with terrifying electric currents, which were as painful as Professor Yang's. As it began to tremble, the entire Hell Island shook continuously, the mountains collapsed, the ground sank, and the new recruits on the island turned pale, and were frightened out of their wits by the continuous vibrations. Are you going to die? Help! I don't want to die here. Especially those who were on the front of the island and witnessed the continent-sized claws with their own eyes, the shock in their hearts was beyond words. They could only stare numbly at the steel column that began to burst with electricity and wait for the result. If the flying squirrels cannot suppress the giant beast under their feet, their fate can be imagined. But, by the way, did any of you see Ron? Did he win or lose in the end? Donk turned around, looked at the central basin of the island, stopped his gaze on the abrupt canyon, and asked. It's really abrupt. As the Hell Island crab was about to awaken, Donk and the others ignored the noise of the battle coming from the basin and retreated to a solid rock layer before stopping. At this moment, a thunderous explosion occurred, attracting their attention. When they ran to the cliff and looked up, a large area of the central basin of Hell Island, which was a large green area a few minutes ago, disappeared. In its place, there was a huge canyon that could be called a miracle. A huge and ferocious snake head emerged from the edge of the canyon, exuding infinite ferocity. The scene was shocking, but Dongt and others did not believe that Ron would die. Because he is a natural ability user, enemies who don't know how to use armament haki can't kill him. After all, who would have thought that a white snake on Hell Island could actually use armament haki? So in their eyes, such a big thing happened on the island, why didn't Ron make any move? Was he really killed? I see him. Over there. Where? Hiss. He's not dead after all. Suddenly, a scream woke everyone up. Everyone turned around in unison, looking at the lightning that was flying higher and higher, their eyes filled with shock. Even such a terrifying attack did not kill Ron, which shows the dominance of the natural system. Only, did he fly too high? Someone whispered, and everyone was shocked. Yes, Hell Island is a no-fly zone. As expected, as the lightning reached the limit distance, the thunderclouds in the sky felt provoked. The dense ions in the air began to become active, gathering into a pillar of light hundreds of meters thick, which blasted down. Ron, the warrior who dared to challenge the sky, was hit by the lightning pillar before he could turn around to avoid it, and flew to the ground again. Back and forth, like playing table tennis. Following the lightning that quickly landed on the ground, Ron looked at the trophy in his hand, the corners of his mouth twitching. He did not intentionally fly high in the sky to attract lightning, but the moment he floated in the air, he, the instigator, finally discovered the changes on the island. The long steel pillars that were ingeniously built stood on the sea, and the scene was so spectacular that it distracted him for a moment. By the time you realize you are flying too high, it is already too late. The lightning beam was so dazzling that it was still clearly visible even at the moment when the steel column was generating the maximum current. Compared with the lightning generated by nature, the lightning on the steel column was like the glow of a firefly. Looking at the lightning column and the deck of the warship, the flying squirrel had a bad premonition for a moment. Hey, the reason why the venom device failed, it couldn't be you who did it. Chapter 78 Treasure Digging. There was no connection, no reason, the flying squirrel simply relied on his intuition to connect this matter with Ron. What's even more terrifying is that he actually guessed it right. What do you mean by coincidence? The scene returned to Hell Island, where a lightning column descended from the sky with a terrifying pressure. The scorching heat instantly melted the hard steel, and the highly toxic liquid that Ron dared not touch was vaporized and evaporated in an instant, disappearing completely. At the same time, the lightning column continued to move forward, destroying everything in its path. Steel bars and concrete could not bring any obstacles to it, and it continued to send Ron to the center of the earth. Ron had already figured out some of the characteristics of the trophy sword. The gemstones on it not only radiated lightning, but also had a strong lightning attracting effect. Ron could feel that the first target of the lightning beam was not him as a lightning man, but the weapon in his hand. Facing the sword, Lei Ting was like an honest man who was cuckolded and was chasing after the old man next door, so murderous. Hemp egg. I thought I was a moving giant lightning rod, which was sad enough, but it turns out you are the real lightning rod. Now thinking back to the day when the white snake was struck by the white lightning column and fell off the cliff on the island, Ron couldn't help but wipe away a cold sweat of sympathy for it. It was lucky enough to grow to such a big size before being killed by lightning. In addition, the strength of the weapon alone is not enough to keep the long sword immortal in the face of such terrifying thunder. The reason why it has not been melted by the lightning is all thanks to this gem, which forms a unique protective film on the blade to withstand the electric shock. Of course, these can be put aside for now. What Ron is concerned about now is how long he will continue to fall. Wouldn't it send me all the way to the bottom of the sea? And these things around here, why do they look so much like mussels? While Ron was daydreaming, he suddenly felt that he had stopped falling and something blocked him from behind. The object was so solid that even the thunder could not melt it. At the same time, the thunder on his body continued to exert its power, instantly tearing him into lightning snakes and merging them into the light column. But this is why the natural system is unreasonable. Even though his body was torn into pieces and not even a thumb-sized piece of good flesh could be found, Ron himself did not feel anything. He could still see, hear, and smell, but his sense of touch was a little confused because his body was broken into pieces. For example, at this moment, the soles of my feet can not only feel the vibrations from this black walnut that is as tall as a person, but also feel the unique charm of tickling the soles of my feet and armpits with one finger at the same time. What the hell is this? Ron wondered strangely. To be able to withstand the thunder for so long without being destroyed, its melting point must be a bit exaggerated, right? Suddenly, Ron looked around, thinking about something through the parts burned by thunder. I don't know what's going on, but this is definitely inside some kind of organism. Could that thing in front of me be? According to legend, powerful monsters all have a magic core in their bodies. This magic core can be said to be the core of the monster, allowing them to speak human language, blizzard, wind blade, fireball. Ahem, in the world of One Piece, magic cores and the like should not exist. Legend has it that chickens have chicken treasures and cows have cow treasures, both of which are priceless treasures. Although this thing looks a bit like a gallstone, the patterns on it are completely natural. Even if it is a gallstone, it must be the king of gallstones. Ron's eyes suddenly brightened up, and he felt that he had discovered some incredible treasure. As if frightened by his naked and hot gaze, the black walnut suddenly shuddered, and while carrying the lightning, it slowly approached the muscle texture next to it. The solid flesh wall turned into soft mud at this moment, and the walnut immediately began to blend into it as soon as it approached. It's still moving. It's alive. Can it? Ron swallowed the words that were on the tip of his tongue. He looked at the black walnuts that were slowly seeping into his muscle wall, and said to himself with shining eyes, "Don't be so superficial. Such a hard thing can't be stir-fried or braised, but it must be good for soaking in wine. This might be a racial talent." When a living creature that only had "I am baby" written on its face appeared in front of Ron, his first reaction was not to understand why it could remain unmelted under the high temperature of lightning and thus make some amazing scientific discoveries, but to ask a question. Can I eat it? If it was half a year ago, Ron would definitely be able to control himself, but life on Hell Island left him with only finding an opponent and foraging for food in his mind. At the same time, these two things can be cleverly combined to become finding an edible opponent. So, a scene that everyone likes to see appeared. At this moment, the thunder in the sky finally vented its anger and slowly dissipated. As soon as he regained control of his body, Ron rushed forward without saying a word and hugged the walnut that was about to disappear in the muscle wall. "Where are you running to? Come out!" Ron's confidence in his strength far exceeded his control over lightning. His fingers, like steel, dug into the texture of the walnut. He stepped on the wall, imitating musician's uprooting of a weeping willow, and forcibly stopped the walnut from integrating into his muscles. Then he gradually increased his strength, his muscles knotted, his teeth clenched, and he exuded an extremely violent aura. As the walnuts were gradually pulled out, the muscles that were connected to the walnuts at some point were pulled into a long line, and then they broke with a crack. Seeing that most of the walnuts had been pulled out, Ron's eyes lit up and he continued to increase his strength. However, at this moment, as if sensing the danger, muscles and flesh strips quickly emerged from the surrounding walls and flexibly stuck to the walnut. In just a moment, the muscles and flesh merged with the walnut, forming an elastic flesh pillar, trying to pull the walnut back. Suddenly, an indescribable force suddenly erupted, pulling Ron to stagger. A mere strip of meat possesses such terrifying power, how powerful must its owner be? Ron dug his feet into the ground and managed to stabilize himself. Feeling the pressure that made his arm bones creak, he was shocked. It's just a piece of meat, but the power it unleashed is not much weaker than his. What level of life is this? But if you are really the owner of this body, I would be afraid of you. How dare you, a mere piece of meat, act so arrogantly in front of me? Tsitsizi. In anger, bright spots appeared on Ron's body. The next moment, a 100-meter tall white skeleton appeared in the passage. He had no muscles on his body and looked fragile, but the violent aura was hard to conceal. When he clenched his fist, an explosion-like roar sounded in the air. Transformed into a white bone giant, Ron's strength was maximized. The high-speed thunder had a terrifying cutting ability, and the muscle wall was unable to resist it. One claw dug into the muscle wall and grabbed the large piece of muscle including the black walnut in the palm of his hand. Then Ron clenched his hands and lifted them up fiercely. Get up! Click! The crisp sound of muscles being torn apart echoed in the passage. The surrounding walls suddenly began to tremble. Heart-shaking vibrations came from the muscles, and ripples formed in the air. The scene was extremely horrifying. Caught off guard, a trace of blue electricity flowed from the corner of Ron's mouth, and the resonance formed by the mountain-like muscle vibration made him dizzy. Fortunately, this form still maintained the passive elemental characteristics, and the scattered electricity was recovered by him in a short while. This thing is important to you, right? Then it belongs to me now. A creepy smile appeared on the skeleton's face. Ron put the walnut in his mouth and started climbing up using his hands and feet without saying a word. This is the only loophole in his unique overload skill. Although he can cancel the overload in less than a second, he cannot actively transform into an element while this state continues. Hell Ape is also a derivative technique of overload and still follows this rule. It's a bit salty. Let's go back and ask Admiral Flying Squirrel what this is. Ron thought happily, not knowing that because of his series of actions, the outside world had fallen into silence. Chapter 79, Death Inexplicably. A few minutes ago, the Hell Island crab suddenly began to wail continuously. The sound was so loud that it made people's eardrums bleed and made them dizzy. At first, the flying squirrel thought it was the steel column inserted into the Hell Island crab's brain that was causing it to wail. However, as the current ran out, the steel column calmed down, but the Hell Island crab was still wailing, and the flying squirrel realized something was wrong. What happened? What made this giant beast scream like that? This question lingered in everyone's mind, and everyone was nervous. Could it be that lightning pillar? The flying squirrel couldn't help but think so. Excluding their actions, the only thing with the same effect as what happened to the Hell Island crab was the lightning pillar that fell from the sky. But the Hell Island crab can discharge electricity through bioelectricity and is extremely resistant to lightning. Even if the power of the lightning column exceeds its tolerance limit and causes damage to it, how big is the area of the lightning column? It shouldn't cause it to wail so miserably and desperately, right? If the flying squirrel had not witnessed with his own eyes what the Hell Island crab did after going crazy, he would have felt sympathy for the sound. Then, the lightning column disappeared. However, the wailing of the Hell Island crab did not stop. Instead, it became louder in an instant, turning from a wailing into a complete scream. What the hell is going on today? The angry flying squirrel smashed the railing with one punch. He was worried about the new recruits on the island whose lives were unknown, and even someone as calm as he was could not help but swear. But what happened next stunned the flying squirrel. The adjutant hurried over with documents in his hand and said to the flying squirrel tremblingly, "Lieutenant General Flying Squirrel, the life signs of the Hell Island crab are disappearing." "I know, but why? People who possess the power of observation haki are unreasonable." When scientific instruments finally collected information from the chaotic magnetic field and determined that the signs of life of the Hell Island crab were disappearing, the flying squirrel discovered this one step ahead. In fact, ordinary soldiers can sometimes burst out with greater courage than generals, because they cannot sense the terrifying life breath of the giant beast in front of them. Now that breath is falling like a cliff, such a huge change, the flying squirrel noticed it immediately. But the question arises, why? Who killed the Hell Island crab? Doesn't he know that once this thing dies, its new body will expand the old body Hell Island by 1/3? Their safety device was built based on the current area of Hell Island. Once the opponent is resurrected, the existing steel pillars will not be able to trap the giant beast in front of them. No. We have to rush back to headquarters immediately to discuss countermeasures. The flying squirrel's eyes fixed, and he gave the order, "Pass my order, send the retreat signal. Everyone board the lifeboat and go to the island to pick up the new recruits." Yes. Looking at the Hell Island crab in front of him that was beginning to convulse due to being on the verge of death, the flying squirrel thought silently, no matter how much sacrifice it would take in the future to reseal the Hell Island crab, at least these little guys are safe. Call out! A column of yellow smoke shot high into the sky, and on the island, the recruits were instantly ecstatic. Great! That's the signal to retreat. Finally there is salvation. Long live Vice Admiral Flying Squirrel! Long live the Navy! At the top of the mountain, Dongt and others were equally excited. When the giant beasts beneath their feet began to wail, the beast tide was calmed by a strong breath of despair, which they could see most clearly from a high place. The only remaining turmoil was just a small-scale chaos caused by the powerful beast kings calming down and returning to their nests as the last convulsions of light began. If the beast tide was caused by a thunderstorm, then everything that happened afterwards had nothing to do with the thunderstorm. The creatures on the island noticed that the giant beast under their feet was beginning to wake up, and the innate pressure from above and below drove them crazy. Now, with the giant beast's dying howl, the pressure disappeared, and the crazy animals woke up. Why are you running? Go back and eat. The beast tide was not only extremely dangerous to the new recruits, but also to the beasts in the beast tide. In the rush of thousands of beasts, countless weak ones were trampled to death, crushed and eaten, and even the Beast King did not dare to say that he could save himself. Now the giant beasts are slowly dying, and the only spasms and vibrations are no more than a volcanic eruption for these guys living on Hell Island, and there is no need to worry at all. After calming down, they slowly dispersed and walked towards their own territories. It goes without saying how much bloodshed will occur in the process. Dongt was a wise man. He saw this clearly and shouted, "Don't get excited. Although the beast tide has dispersed, there are still many powerful creatures below. Don't be reckless, let's slip out little by little." Yes. Commander Donti. After surviving the death crisis, the recruits finally smiled again after not seeing each other for many days. Dongt shook his head and ignored it, but turned his head to look behind him. Now that the turmoil has subsided, Ron should show up by now, right? Dong Te is not a BL, he just wants to know how far he has been left behind during his time on Hell Island. A few hours later, in the cave in the southeast of Hell Island, the temporary base of the Navy. That's right. The Hell Island crab is confirmed dead. The flying squirrel reported to Den Den Mushi calmly, then he paused for a moment and said, "When it resurrects again, please let me stand at the front." As soon as he finished speaking, Sengoku, on the other end of the Den Den Mushi, yelled angrily, "Enough! It's not your fault this time, flying squirrel. Do you want to embarrass a marshal like me?" The flying squirrel responded with silence, and Warring States also responded with silence. In fact, both of them knew that if they wanted to reseal the Hell Island crab, the cost of manpower, material resources, and financial resources would be no less than going to war with the 4 emperors of the New World. There would be countless casualties, and the Navy would suffer heavy losses. And someone had to take the blame for this huge loss. Either the flying squirrel who failed to fulfill his duties, or Sengoku who was the marshal. After a moment of silence, Zhangguo spoke first, "Bring back all the new recruits, and leave the rest to me." "Marshal! Shut up!" Zhangguo's majestic roar suppressed the anxious call of the flying squirrel, I am the Marshal, obey orders. The air froze for a long time. The flying squirrel looked determined and raised his right hand to salute, yes. At the Navy headquarters, Sengoku listened to the answer from the Den Mushi, with a bitter smile on his face. Having been the Navy Admiral for more than a decade, he had long seen the truth behind the so-called Marshal of the Navy. This is a scapegoat. He was the one who took the blame for the pirates, the robbery of Tenjo gold, and the establishment of the Revolutionary Army. Even when Garp spoke out in front of the 5 elders, the 5 elders blamed him for not bringing in the discipline of the Navy. The longer he has been the Admiral of the Navy, the longer he has been blamed. It was obvious that the previous Marshal Cyborg Sora could have been promoted to Commander-in-Chief of the entire army by virtue of his amazing feat of executing Pirate King Roger, but when it was his turn, he was left with no choice but to take the blame. Zhang Guo has seen through everything. He does not ask for how high an official position he can hold in the future. Being able to contribute his last bit of blood for the stability of this sea is enough to comfort him in this life. Isn't it just taking the blame? I'm used to it. Sighing, Zhang Guo changed the serious topic and asked, where are the new recruits? What are the casualties? 7 dead, 3 seriously injured, and minor injuries not included. Speaking of this, the flying squirrel also had a bitter smile on his face. He thought that this batch of recruits would be able to break the previous record, but he did not expect that a sudden beast tide would cause heavy losses to the recruits. 7 great talents. Zhang Guo felt a little heartbroken. These new recruits were not ordinary people randomly recruited by the branch, but real geniuses who had been carefully trained and selected. Although the purpose was to let them see themselves clearly in the crisis and thus strengthen their faith, the loss this time was too heavy. It was so serious that Zhang Guo was a little breathless. Zhang Guo could foresee that Zifa would ask him with a dark face, why did such a large number of casualties occur in a survival training? For these little guys, even if he didn't formally accept them as his disciples like Ron, Zifa treated them as his own family. In this cruel survival experience of the headquarters, Zifa was the one who was most worried every time he went out to sea. But Ron? Zhang Guo couldn't help but pay more attention to Zifa's last disciple after many years, and asked, where's Ron? How is he? Ron. The flying squirrel was in a mixed mood at the moment. This beast tide and the price to be paid for the future war with the Hell Island crab were all caused by Ron. And he couldn't say that he had nothing to do with it. Do you think he was angry or smiling bitterly? After thinking for a while, the flying squirrel reported truthfully, he hasn't come back yet. He has gone deep into the central basin. Even for him, it will take some time to come back. At this point, the flying squirrel suddenly became speechless. Zhang Guo was confused and asked, "Hey? What happened?" Flying Squirrel? Lieutenant General Flying Squirrel. Just when Zhang Guo thought something had happened and was in a tense mood, the trembling voice of the Flying Squirrel sounded in the Den Mushi, Marshal. Marshal. I remember Vegapunk said that the Hell Island crab has a core, right? Yes. According to Vegapunk's instruments, all the tissues of the Hell Island crab grow from the core, and everything outside is a shell to protect the core. Why are you asking this suddenly? Zhang Guo answered truthfully and suddenly held his breath. Is it possible, could it be? Tyranny's shocking achievement. Yo, Ron. Mr. Ron, welcome back. As a tall figure covered in animal skins walked into the cave, all the nearby Navy soldiers, whether new recruits or veterans, looked at him with respect. Everything Ron had experienced had spread after everyone returned. Those powerful beasts that made people despair were just toys to Ron, and their terrifying fighting power shocked them. In this world where the strong are respected, Ron used his own strength to win the respect he deserved. Of course, the Flying Squirrel strictly ordered the adjutant and the colonel to keep quiet about the fact that Ron caused the beast tide, and did not tell everyone. After all, it is better not to mention such things that are not conducive to unity. What else can we do? Having caused such serious casualties, should Ron be made to commit suicide to make amends, or should he be made to face difficulties and be ostracized in the headquarters in the future? Do you really think that Drago is the only traitor in the Navy in recent years? There is a group of them every year, but they are all dealt with secretly by the Navy. The kindness of the flying squirrel is a mature kindness, with the thoughts of an adult. It is not the ridiculous sense of justice of a certain elementary school student who solves a case and tells the truth no matter what the consequences are, and then makes excuses to convince himself while crying. If anyone dares to mention this matter, the flying squirrel will be the first to chop him off. After drilling out of the basin, Ron quickly understood what had happened, and the doubts that had puzzled him before were also answered. However, facts have proved that birds of a feather flock together. He was hanging out with the sinister naval high-ranking officials all day long. In addition, Ron was not a good person. When he learned that the recruits suffered heavy casualties in the Beast Tide, he decisively chose to keep silent. What? You say this is my fault? Why do you wrongly accuse a good person? Then he threw out a picture of weak, pitiful, helpless.jpg and waited for the Navy's top brass to rescue him. The air was suddenly filled with a happy atmosphere. After all, judging from the respect shown to him by the people around him, either no one knew the truth, or those who knew the truth chose to keep silent. Don't make the situation too obvious. Hello everyone. Hey, don't, why are you so dark? Ha ha ha. The crater is quite dangerous. Everyone, take your time. I'm going to report to Vice Admiral Flying Squirrel first. After greeting everyone along the way, Ron strolled to the tent where the flying squirrel was. He put down the big walnut on his shoulder, saluted, and said, "Lieutenant General Flying Squirrel. Come and help me see what this is. Can I eat it?" Eat, you big head ghost, eat." He would never forget the smell coming from the walnut. The expression on the flying squirrel's face suddenly became very interesting, with a variety of emotions such as surviving a disaster, joy, anger, sadness, etc. Finally, it turned heavy and said to the Den Mushi, "Ron is back. I will report the details to you later." Then he hung up the phone, leaving Zhang Guo confused. Seeing the flying squirrel walking towards him with a gloomy face, Ron's heart skipped a beat. He was sure that the flying squirrel was one of the insiders. Now it looked like he was going to clean up the mess. However, the flying squirrel ignored Ron and walked to his side, squatting down and stroking the big black walnut. Under Ron's suspicious gaze, the flying squirrel silently shed 2 tears, but his face was full of a happy smile. The scene was very strange. Could this thing have a hypnotic function? Why didn't I notice it? As the laborer who carried the walnuts all the way back, Ron scratched the back of his head. At this time, the flying squirrel raised his head and stared at Ron seriously. "Tell me, Ron, where did you get this thing? Not good. Could this thing have been put in there by the Navy?" Ron didn't know the truth about the Hell Island crab at this time. He rolled his eyes and said with a smile, "Oh, you are talking about this. I picked it from the tree, Lieutenant General Flying Squirrel, don't make such a joke, ha ha, ha." The moment he heard the word in the tree, the flying squirrel's mouth twitched and he drew his sword. The background of the veteran Vice Admiral was fully demonstrated at this moment. Even though the flying squirrel was old and weak, and had countless hidden injuries, his control of strength and body coordination far exceeded Ron's understanding. Before he could dodge with elemental teleportation, a sword blade emitting cold light was placed on his shoulder. The flying squirrel's control of strength can also be seen here. The armed color domineering on the blade is not completely covered, but there is a black line on the narrow blade that is difficult to detect with the naked eye. Under the majestic gaze of the flying squirrel, Ron embarrassedly stopped laughing. Seeing this, the flying squirrel said nonchalantly, "I heard that the beast tide spread from the center of the island. Ron, do you know why?" Ron's heart skipped a beat, and he laughed loudly, shaking his head, I don't know. The venom breeding ground inside the island has been destroyed. Do you know why? What the hell? At this moment, the blade was only 1 centimeter away from his neck. Ron's mouth twitched, and he lowered his head and said to his heart, I was wrong, I'm sorry. But I swear, it was really an accident. Stop talking nonsense. Tell me, where did you get this thing? Such a smooth Ron gave Flying Squirrel a headache. In the Navy, there were many upright and unyielding people, but Ron's style was different from theirs. It was unclear whether it was a blessing or a curse for the Navy. After rolling his eyes, the Flying Squirrel sheathed his sword and waved his hand unhappily. In this regard, Ron had no choice but to tell the truth. During the story, the Flying Squirrel's eyes first changed from satisfaction, then surprise, and finally to horror, and then he completely rolled his eyes. Unable to catch his breath, the Flying Squirrel coughed twice with difficulty, pushed away Ron's hand, and trembled as he pointed at the walnut and said, That's it? You found the core of the Hell Island crab. Just happened to encounter it when being struck by lightning? It's that simple. What Hell Island crab? Ron was confused. Are you talking about the Hell Island under our feet? Is it really alive? Damn it! Why don't you run away? Ron had seen the savage muscle power of the Hell Island crab. It was just a few muscle fibers, but the twisted meat could actually burst out with a force that was no weaker than his normal full strength. If the entire Hell Island was its body, that unreasonable and powerful muscle power would be enough to destroy the world, by hammering it. Ron's eyes couldn't be fake, he was really nervous. Fighting an opponent who had no hope of winning was not challenging himself, but courting death. Those who couldn't tell the difference between courting death and challenging their limits would never live to be as old as Ron. But the more surprised Ron was, the more speechless and angry the Flying Squirrel became. Thinking about the sacrifices made back then, and then thinking about Ron's experience, a feeling of frustration over his lofty ambitions made the veteran speechless for a long time. Finally, he waved his hands, instantly looking 30 years older. He used up all his strength, raised his head and sighed, This is fate. Jean Guo had the same mood as the Flying Squirrel. The survival training could not continue due to an accident. Before returning, the Flying Squirrel reported to Jean Guo in a tone of seeing through the truth of life. Upon hearing that Ron was struck into the ground by the lightning pillar because of his distraction, but accidentally found the core, the old man Jean Guo trembled and crushed the microphone in his hand into pieces. Then he found the Den Den Mushi and called back, but neither of them had the strength to speak. Finally, it was Jean Guo who broke the silence and said, The new recruits will be judged based on their performance during this period. I see. Several of the youngsters performed well this time and can be directly assigned to work in the Grand Line after leaving the camp. The Flying Squirrel nodded to show that he understood. Although the time is less than 3 months, it is clear that the recruits who have survived until now can basically survive 3 months. And this batch is different from the previous batches. The follow-up impact of the beast tide has made Hell Island unable to be used as a training ground in the short term. The beasts in the periphery have suffered heavy casualties and need to be recaptured and replenished. Afterwards, the two began to discuss where there were vacancies based on the recruits' performance and where they could be assigned to take up the positions and make a draft. For some reason, neither of them mentioned Ron. It's not that they don't want to, but they are thinking carefully about how to arrange for Ron. No matter if it was an accident or something else, Ron completely killed the Hell Island crab, and the core was placed in the Flying Squirrel's room. It was an amazing feat without any water in it. How to reward a new soldier for such a great achievement is a major problem. Tall, the tree stands out in the forest. It's too low, which makes people feel disheartened. End of this chapter. Like and subscribe for more videos like this.